Mana System, Hello, World. By M.J. Markgrove. Chapter 121, Krager vs. Paul Round 2. I set the fortress down within spitting distance of the dungeon. I had no time or patience to be stealthy. Every hour it felt like an invisible noose was starting to tighten around my neck. I didn't know if it was my imagination or some part of that damn ability that Randy was using. Considering it lessened as I got closer to Chicago, my money was on an ability. Well, let him use his abilities. I had surprises of my own to bring to our next encounter. The four of us rushed through the dungeon, killing off the lower-level kobolds with ease. I used it as a test bed to try out some of the new skills. Maddening Laugh turned out to be highly effective against the barely cognizant kobolds. After only one use they devolved into nothing more than aggressive animals, their more animalistic tendencies taking over. They didn't last long enough for me to cast it again, and I chose not to waste multicast on it. Underhanded Blow was also effective. My ability to instantly enhance my speed by 2 points by striking ears, eyes, or genitalia, threw off my target's defenses. I learned that double strike did not carry over critical damage into the second strike, making it less desirable than I had originally thought. Still, the ability to add my elemental damage to the attack more than made up for it. 2 bolts of electricity were usually enough to render my target immobile. Arcane Bolt was a weak spell, but my level and intelligence stat were high enough to make it a powerful ability. It was also fast, much faster than my Stunning Gust or Shockwave. Stunning Gust got close if I enhanced my weapon with wind, but if you were quick enough you could dodge the attack. Reflect worked as advertised, but I had to actually get hit to reflect the damage. Against a foe like these weak kobolds, it was useless, but against someone like Randy Cotton, it could change the course of the fight. Wall of Thorns worked to bottle attackers or block off areas. Damage-wise it was pretty unremarkable. I was still going to hold onto it for now though. Last but not least was Orb of Darkness. I managed to cast it 6 times before we reached the boss area, due to the nature of the spell. This allowed me to see 4 different curses: Strength, Agility, Perception, and Luck. The Strength and Agility curses had obvious signs. The affected target could either barely hold their spear or their attacks were slow and clumsy. Perception didn't seem that effective against the creatures, and I realized it was because they used their sense of smell more than sight. It did make them easier to fight, so it had some effect. Luck was always a weird one, but when a kobold affected by it rushed at me and tripped, impaling himself on his spear, I think it may have been my favorite. The 4 of us entered the boss area. Krager was sitting on his throne with the 3 females standing around him. He looked bored until his eyes landed on the 4 of us. When his eyes met mine he growled menacingly and stepped off his throne. "You 3 can handle the others, leave Krager to me." "Don't take too much time," Fiona said, "we need to get moving." I nodded, running forward as Krager got his buffs. The last time I fought the champion, I had to use my aura to keep up. That was 5 levels on my main class ago and a whole slew of attribute points. Krager burst toward me with a bestial roar and a sword that looked like a chipped and rusted slab of steel. It was different than his old sword, but no less intimidating for it. I answered his roar with one of my own, activating Blink Step and Area of Denial. We slammed into each other with a thunderous boom, and to my surprise, I was sent flying across the area, my shield still intact. I crashed into one of the fake buildings with a resounding boom, Krager hot on my heel. I cast Wall of Thorns to slow him down, but he barreled right through without slowing. I hit him with an arcane bolt as I jumped out of the way. His arm whipped out like lightning, smashing into my shield and sending me on a ride once more. Somehow I don't recall him having this ability before, unless it was used up when he slammed into one of the buildings. My shield was holding, but it was cracked, which told me Krager's strength was well into the 2nd tier. I wasn't done yet though. I hit him with Orb of Darkness and followed it up with Maddening Laugh. The juggernaut of a kobold stumbled from the collective loss of attribute points. 4 from wisdom and 1 from intelligence. He shook his head and growled at me, using the ability I had come to collect. With a flicker of motion, the ground underneath him exploded as he flew straight at me. I activated Sunder skill and stood my ground. As I had figured, his first skill had run its course and he slammed into my shield, bouncing off and shattering it. Before he was able to recover his footing, I slammed my staff into his groin and activated Double Strike along with flurry of blows. The fight was quickly ended after that, his body a ruined mess. Double Strike couldn't double the damage from flurry, but that didn't matter. I looked up to see the other 3 still fighting off the female kobolds. They didn't last much longer, not up to the task of solo combat. With the fight ended, I looked at the skill I acquired. Unstoppable force. For 15 seconds you become an unstoppable force of nature, immune to physical damage as well as any effect that can slow or hinder movement. Cost 50 mana 75 stamina. Cooldown 5 minutes. I had actually been hoping for the other spell that he used to launch himself at me, but now I think I may have gotten the better skill. Its true utility hadn't been displayed during our first fight. The cost was prohibitive for most fighters, but I had plenty of mana to spare. I would run out of stamina before I ran out of mana. I let Martin and Ska split the loot. It was my thanks for their help in this endeavor. I had finally hit level 10 in my second class and I distributed my new stat points. Paul Fuller Mantra Enchanter / Maw of the Void level 20 tenths. Strength, 20, plus 2, modifier x21. Endurance, 20 modifier x39. Agility, 20, plus 2, modifier x21. Perception, 18 modifier x21. Intelligence, 25 modifier x39. Wisdom, 15 modifier x21. Charisma, 11 modifier x21. Luck, 16 modifier x21. HP, 780, 858. Stamina, 400, 440. Stamina Rigon, M819. Mana, 975. Mana Rigon, M315. I decided to max out strength and agility this time. I figured if nothing else, the fight with Randy Cotton and the remaining Black Dragon might help me unlock the second tier of at least one of the attributes. It was no wonder dual classers were so much stronger than solo class people. Sure, there was a downside that you had to level both classes, but I think the bonuses made up for that, as long as you had the proper environment to level. I decided to keep the experience train going on my second class. At least until it hit 15. That seemed like a good spot to switch it back over. We made our way back to the fortress and got ready for the long journey north. Since I knew the journey north was going to be across unexplored terrain, I discussed it with the others. So into the unknown, Martin quipped. Yeah, that's why I think we should have 2 of the cannons manned at all times. What about the automated defenses? I thought you were going to incorporate the cannons into them. That was on the agenda, but I kind of got sidetracked, I replied tiredly. Fair enough, Martin replied, I assume you want me and Ska on the forward cannons. Ska growled in discontent. He never liked operating the turrets, he was more a hands-on fighter. Yeah, we can switch off every few hours to get some rest and move around. If it seems relatively safe, we can drop it down to 1 person at a time. At least until we get closer to Illinois. Fair enough. Come on Ska, you can regale me with stories of your adventures to help pass the time, Martin said, wrapping his arm around Ska's shoulder and leading him down the hall to the forward cannons. Did you want me to scout ahead? Fiona asked. No, while it may help, I don't want you too far away if we get into trouble. There is no telling if the Black Dragon has laid a trap along the way for us or not. Wouldn't that be more of a reason for me to spot it first? I shook my head. Any traps they would have laid would have you in mind as well. You are the most difficult target to deal with. If you get away, they know they will be constantly looking over their shoulder. Fair enough. So what do you want me to do? Up to you, although, I wouldn't say no to an extra set of eyes on the roof. But we won't need that right away. How about you hang out with Ska and Martin? What about you? I'll be fine. You sure? Yeah, it's not like I haven't been through hell before, losing a hand hardly even makes it on the top 5 most fucked up things to happen to me. She looked at me worriedly before replying. All right, but remember, you're not in this alone. You have your friends to help you through, and that means for everything. I know, I said, smiling at her. She floated there, looking at me for another few seconds before she finally followed the others. I sagged a little after she left. The stress was getting to me again. I knew she wanted to help, wanted me to reach out and express my emotions, but I just couldn't do it. Admitting to myself that I wasn't up to this task was bad enough, admitting it to my friends was something entirely different. I believed I could take down Randy and his cronies, but I wasn't sure I would be coming back. But that was my burden to bear, not theirs. For now, I would present the most confident exterior I could. I reached over to the control panel and began the startup sequence for the fortress. We would be flying low and fast, with the cloak engaged. The fortress gave a light shake as it rose off the ground, and I heard the clink as the landing struts folded back into the lower hull. I used the remote viewer to make sure everything was secured, then I activated the cloak as we rose into the sky. It was time to go deal with a threat that had been looming over our group for far too long. A glint of light passed over a curved piece of glass as it was lowered from a distant watcher's eye. The man took note of what he had witnessed, marking down his findings in a notebook. Minutes later a portal appeared behind him and a woman stepped out. "Well?" Stone asked. "He's heading north, as was predicted." Was it necessary to expose Jacob though? The shrouded woman let out a low laugh. Jacob was becoming arrogant, he needed to be knocked down a peg or two. It matters not that he was exposed and that one Gargan lived, not in the grand scheme of things. That's not what I asked. Stone let out an exasperated sigh. Fine, yes, it was necessary, according to the seer. It also helped place Mr. Fuller on a collision course with the Black Dragon and hopefully, deal with two problems at once. Let's hope you and the seer are correct. Our spies report that he has hit level 20 and gotten a second class, but they were unable to get close enough to determine what it was. That shouldn't be a problem. If he survives we will eventually get that information, then he will have no tricks to pull. And what about the reports from West Exit? They say he cleared out a horde dungeon. A few extra stat points won't make that much of a difference. His aura of rage was more of a problem, but we have accurate intel that he can no longer utilize it without his body breaking down. The man mulled this news over for a minute before he asked his next question. The enchanting. We are starting to make progress on that front, albeit slowly. It's not enchanting per se, it's runic enhancement. Anything to show of our efforts. Stone produced a dagger from her ring, that seemed to ooze darkness, and handed it to the unnamed man. He inspected the dagger. The hidden killer dagger does not reflect light, allows the user to more easily blend in with shadows. There was no enhancement to damage, but the effect was unique. He hadn't seen an enchanted dagger with this ability before. He looked at the crude runes carved into the steel of the blade. It was where the darkness seemed to seep from. He gave the dagger a spin and flipped it into the air, easily catching the blade. He handed it back to Stone. No luck with that other rune. No, it appears it was damaged when we broke the enchantment it was powering. Our crafters have narrowed it down to a handful of possibilities and they should have that stealth rune figured out in time. Good, what about the other members of the council? Off doing whatever tasks they have deemed necessary. But as far as I can tell, they are still alive. All right. Douglas, I'm ready to move on to my next objective, if you would be so kind. A portal opened and the man stepped through. Stone waited a few minutes, looking toward the north before another portal opened and she stepped through as well. Chapter 122, Reconnaissance. The trip north was mostly uneventful. I say mostly because, holy shit, had the land changed. We flew near a lake that looked like blood. Massive tentacles squirmed within the liquid, just below the surface. Thankfully, I had spotted it before we flew directly overhead. Who knew what creatures waited within? Another problem was a bright flash in the distance. Normally, I would have avoided that completely, but the ominous mushroom cloud after made me decide to detour near the area. We needed to make sure it wasn't something we had to worry about. Turns out someone had gotten a hold of a tactical nuke, leveling some small town on the east side of what was once northern Arkansas. After seeing what lay beyond, I couldn't blame the people for setting the weapon off. The land for as far as you could see was dead. The radiation detector was blipping away and I chose to turn back toward the west. Fiona returned from scouting with news of what was on the ground. Enterior locusts, she said, looking grim. Are those bad? She nodded. They are magical creatures that can strip an entire world if left alone long enough. Do we need to worry? No, whatever weapon was activated, seemed to have destroyed the colony. If it hadn't they would already be consuming the vegetation around us and probably the fortress as they are drawn to magic. What kind of sick world produces creatures like this? Not a world, it's a spell, well, more a summoning, like Martin's but way worse. I don't know if that's any better. So, you're saying someone summoned these creatures, for what purpose? Most likely to kill off mages or a group of mages. When they get out of control like this though, it usually means the mage that summoned them was either killed or lost control, which would result in him being killed by the locusts anyway. Well, whoever it was, it serves them right. Let's keep moving. We traveled 300 or 400 miles a day, setting down in the evenings to rest and recuperate. I could push harder since we had sleeping accommodations, but I didn't want us burned out when we reached our target. At the moment we were landed in what first appeared to be a strange forest. It turned out to be made of mushrooms of all types. The mushrooms pushed up to the height of trees. Some of the mushrooms glowed in wild bioluminescent colors after the sun went down. It was eerily beautiful to watch, but deadly. Clouds of spores drifted in the air like fog, and I had to cleanse everyone as soon as we re-entered the fortress from a quick but ill-advised trip outside. Even activating the fire-based defense on the fortress only kept the spores away temporarily, though it did clear out a large area around us and set the massive mushrooms ablaze. Deciding not to risk spreading these toxic spores, we rose out of the mushroom forest and kept flying as I burned away any remnants clinging to the fortress. Fiona said she spotted someone in the forest, screaming in rage and throwing invectives our way, but I thought she might have been seeing things. If she wasn't, I didn't want to meet any man, human or otherwise, that could survive in that sort of environment. Eventually, we reached southern Illinois. When I activated my Reaper title, I finally got a faint hit. The direction it came from was mainly north. That meant I had been accurate in my assumption that Randy had headed straight back to his base of operations. I could barely see the tip of the spine in the distance, the haze of early morning shrouding most of the mountain range. Now that we were sure of where our quarry resided, it was time to prepare. I still had the weird feeling in the back of my mind urging me onward, but being this close I was able to ignore it for the most part. I set the fortress down in a small town that appeared abandoned. There was a quarry on the east side that allowed for long sight lines and no real way for anyone to get to us without being spotted. "Why are we setting down early?" Martin asked. "It's time to prepare. Tomorrow we will reach our target and we need to be ready for anything." Ska growled in anticipation for the events to come, and Fiona looked worried. "Don't worry, we'll be okay. We have the fortress to soften them up." She gave me the look that said she wasn't buying my bullshit, but nodded anyway, choosing to keep her thoughts on the subject to herself. After setting the fortress down, I got to work. My workshop was a mess. I hadn't had time to clean it since our previous battle with the Black Dragon. Dried blood still coated some surfaces from where I brushed up against them with my clothing. Tools and bits of metal were scattered haphazardly across the space, and I cursed my laziness. I didn't have time to clean now, so I swept the workbench clear. All the junk fell to the floor with a clatter as Martin walked in. "Did a tornado come through here?" "I wish, at least then I could explain away the mess," I grumbled. "Need any help cleaning?" "No, it will have to wait until we finish this mission. I have a ton of work to complete before tomorrow." "Oh, is this that mystery object you bought at the bazaar?" "Yup," I replied, pulling out a lacquered black box with gold inlay. I told the smith it wasn't necessary, but he insisted. "Do I get a peek at it?" "Nope," I smiled, pushing him out of the room as he complained loudly. I shut and locked the door. This was going to be hard enough with one hand. I didn't need any other distractions. I activated the rune on the wall that muffled sound. I also took my prosthetic off. It would only get in the way of this delicate work. My eyes were red from staying up until the early morning, but I had completed the runes. The item was safely stashed in my ring, ready to be attached at a moment's notice. The others hadn't been idle. We had discussed what needed to happen beforehand. They had taken all but 4 of the cannons and moved them to the forward section of the fortress. I had never designed the fortress to be a weapon, so we were having to improvise a bit. All of the cannons were charged and could be quickly swapped out. That gave each gunner 4 shots before having to recharge. Ska had 10 charged mana hearts, so he would run out before Martin did, but it would have to do. The blasts were powerful enough to shear through steel, but unlike wood, steel was solid enough to cause the blast of mana to explode, similar to how the blasts exploded when they impacted the ground that time we fought the elves. It would take powerful shields to absorb the damage. Even the fortress shields could only take a dozen direct impacts before failing. I rested until noon and then we got back into the air. Slowly we crept closer to Chicago, cloak engaged as we crawled through the dimming daylight. Every hour or so I would activate my title to determine the location of our target. It hadn't moved much in that time, but I could tell it was close to the downtown area. That was going to be a problem. The tall buildings prevented me from getting the fortress close enough to strike at him directly. "Incoming!" Fiona yelled. I immediately turned off the cloak and engaged the shield as something impacted its surface, causing a ripple. Fiona was on the roof as I had to keep track of the buildings. Thankfully she was able to get inside before the shield went up. More flashes of light blasted from hidden areas within the surrounding buildings. The shells slammed into our shield, shaking the fortress but only reducing the shield by 200 points. "Prepare to return fire," I yelled over the radio, rotating the front of the fortress to face one of the buildings. "Fire!" Two white streams of condensed mana burst forth from our cannons, obliterating the bottom floor of a 3-story building. Glass and bricks flew in every direction as the building collapsed in on itself. Martin and Ska swapped out the cannons for fresh ones as I rotated the fortress to the next target and tried to make it hard for the enemy to strike back. If it wasn't for the remote viewer, I don't think I would even know what was going on. The front of the fortress was wreathed in explosions as more and more artillery shells exploded against the shield. The enemy had quickly switched to incendiary rounds to try and blind us. Turns out these were also far more damaging to the shield as it dropped another 600 points. I shunted the power of the cloak crystal to the shields to keep it going. This was going to be a battle of attrition. We had been forced to retreat after 20 minutes of intense fighting. Entire blocks had been leveled in the ensuing battle, but still there seemed to be an endless supply of tanks and artillery at the Black Dragon's disposal. I had no idea where they had gotten the heavy armament, it wasn't here before. I knew that Randy was some head honcho for a private military firm, but I didn't realize the man had a whole army. I guess he would have to if he subdued New York. The fortress was not unscathed. The shields had failed on a few occasions, letting rounds through. If they had been using armor-penetrating rounds instead of the incendiary ones, we would have likely died. But the condensed stone had absorbed most of the damage. One room was a total loss, a round blowing through a weak portion and turning everything inside to melted slag. Thankfully, no critical damage impacted our ability to fight, fly, or maneuver. The rest could be fixed in time. Ska and Martin had been singed by the fires, but elemental defense saved them from the worst of it. We did have a few sketchy moments when the power dropped out and an agent of Randy's managed to teleport aboard. Fiona was able to deal with him while the rest of us were occupied. I dumped his corpse out of the exit after we landed. We had retreated 20 miles outside of Chicago. While Martin was recharging the cannons, Ska and Fiona were patrolling, making sure nobody snuck up on us while I did my best to fix the gaping hole in the fortress. I could only seal it closed, not having the time to source additional rock to bring it back to 100%. Ska and Fiona came running a few minutes later. "There are dozens coming," she yelled. I swore, using my wings to fly around to the entrance. The two rushed up the ramp and I slammed the door closed. The fortress was already airborne before I got the second door closed. Martin must have heard. Magic spells and ranged weapons pelted the shield as we rose into the sky. I ran past Martin and got on one of the cannons. The people below weren't dumb though, they scattered as soon as they saw the weapon move. That didn't save all of them though, as I blasted a group of 5 with the cannon. "Move us east," I said over the radio, tired from the day's battle. We finally moved out of range of the attackers and I swapped out for Martin in the command chair. I wanted to go back in and lay waste to everything that Randy Cotton cared about, but we still hadn't recharged the shields and everyone was exhausted. We moved around, not staying on one heading until we came across a massive lake. It had to easily be the size of one of the Great Lakes. But we were far too south for it to be one of those lakes. There were a few scattered islands far enough out that it would be safe to touch down for the night. The muddy ground of the small island seemed to suck in the landing gear of the fortress. I had to have Martin lift it back up so I could compress the earth below with my magic enough for it to support us. I got back to work patching the hole and Martin got back to recharging the mana hearts. My work was done after another 20 minutes. Ska and Fiona patrolled the island, but there wasn't anything to see and it was all visible from the ship. I walked back aboard and helped Martin to refill the crystals. It was going to be another long day tomorrow. Chapter 123, War Footing. The war, if you want to even call it that, between the Black Dragon and our ragtag team of 4 went on for weeks. The Black Dragon had numbers, more than I had ever thought possible. Every time we thought we cleared out the entrenched heavy weapons, more would be rolled out and the battle would commence again. We were hounded every time we landed. They even found our damn island sanctuary and pounded it to dust with long-range artillery. The fortress was a mess, but it was holding together better than I could have hoped for. The fortress floated toward downtown Chicago, listing a bit to the left where a portion of the levitator had been blown away. Both Ska and Martin had hairless heads, a blast of flame cooking their flesh before I healed them. The scars were gone, but the hair would have to regrow on its own. I hoped Ska's regrew fast. Grimalkin did not look good furless. It was a mix between a naked molar rod and a wrinkly testicle. Our approach had been uncontested. That was mostly due to my fuck everything plan. A corridor of rubble lined our approach for 2 blocks in either direction. Burned out tanks and melted artillery poked out of more than one pile of rubble. A massive crater marked where we had landed, a lucky hit on an ammunition depot. I didn't know where they had gotten all these weapons, and at this point, it didn't matter. I heard one of the cannons going off and a blast tore through a section of building still standing. There was no return fire. That was either a good thing or this was a trap. I wouldn't put it past Randy to try and trap us. He almost succeeded a week ago. I had been all cocksure that we had cleared out the entrenched enemy when an IED exploded and nearly took out the fortress. That was the attack that damaged the levitator and cooked Martin and Ska. Since then we were extra careful about approaching too low to the ground. We floated around the combat area, trying to determine the best approach. There were no easy ways into the taller buildings. There was always the option to level the entire area, but that was the last resort. First of all, I didn't think it would work, and I didn't want that cockroach escaping. Sending blasts toward the center didn't work either. He had some sort of shield in place that absorbed the attacks. It wasn't all that surprising, considering his resources. I was also glad I had elected not to use nerve gas. The wind off of Lake Superior would have blown it south, killing who knows how many innocent people. Wearing the shield down could take weeks, assuming we could pump enough damage into it quickly enough to take it down. From our few exploratory attacks, my guess was that wasn't a possibility. I knew what needed to happen, but I was loath to do it. Alright, I think this phase of the war is over, it's time to hit the ground and engage in close combat. Won't they be expecting that? Martin asked. Yup, that's why I'm going to stick the fortress on patrol mode. Wait, it can do that? Well, sorta. Mostly it'll just fly a pre-programmed path. I could tell it to fly a random path, but with the tall buildings, it would be more likely to fly into them. They won't fall for that for long. How are we getting through the shield? The sewers, it's the only way I can see to get through. You know he will have them rigged or defended. Yup, so we need to be quick and brutal. Hopefully, they won't expect it and we can get the drop on them. Ska hissed in a mix of disgust and delight. I don't like stinky sewers, but I will put up with it if it means glorious battle. Martin just rolled his eyes. Let's just go kill this prick so I can get back to something worthwhile. Out of everyone, Fiona looked the most nervous. I gave her a reassuring smile and that seemed to help a bit. When the fortress was out of sight, behind a building that wasn't destroyed and was outside the combat area, we jumped. I carried Martin as he didn't have any ability to absorb the landing. The fortress meandered away, the shield re-engaged as soon as the door shut. We waited quietly, huddled in the alley until Fiona returned. Okay, I found a sewer entrance. It didn't have any traps on it that I could see. Alright, let's go. The setting sun was our ally as we quickly crossed the streets and made our way to the sewer. I lifted the heavy metal lid off with little effort, trying to do it as quietly as possible. Fiona was already below, but Ska jumped down the hole without a sound. Martin was next as he eyed the dirty ladder with trepidation. I was the last into the stinky hole as I closed the manhole cover above us. Darkness closed in, making it feel like we had stepped into dark oblivion. There were no words spoken as the echoes would carry in the tunnels. I heard a quiet pop as Martin drank his dark vision potion. I activated my tattoo, then decided against it as it gave off too much light. I pulled a similar portion from my ring and drank it. It would last for 10 minutes. We each had 3 of the potions. Ska and Fiona didn't need them. Ska and Fiona ranged ahead by 20 feet. I didn't want Fiona going too far ahead in case there was a trap specifically designed to capture or kill her. The only thing that greeted us was rats. I would have considered these mutant rats prior to the system, but they were just very large rats. They scurried away as we approached. When we got to an intersection, Fiona would range ahead a short distance and then return. It wasn't the most effective way to get our bearings, but it worked. As we were moving down one corridor, we heard a muffled blast followed by voices. I told you it was a bad idea to place mines in the tunnel, damn rats keep setting them off. It's better than spending all day down here in this stench. Fuck this, let's go back to the barricade and get a drink. It's not like we will see any action for some time. I hear that damn flying rock is still flying around the city waiting to shoot anything that pops its head out. Yeah, just hope the boss man doesn't catch us slacking off, you know how he gets. The other man chuckled. Yeah, like he would dirty himself by coming down here. The voices moved farther away before they could no longer be clearly heard. I looked toward Martin and mouthed imp. A malicious smile crossed his face as he quietly cast his spell. The dirty green wart-covered creature crawled out of a black tar-like portal in the ground. Martin pointed down the tunnel and ordered the creature onward. A minute later another explosion sounded, Closer to us than the last time. Martin nodded and we continued down that tunnel. Fucking hell, that's the last of the mines. How many damn rats are down here? Dylan wondered. Quiet, you hear that? Rodney said, holding his hand up. Dylan quieted down and he heard splashing. The two looked at each other as the sound grew closer. Dylan rushed over to the mounted machine gun and racked the slide. It wouldn't stop a powerful foe but it would slow them down. A small green creature stepped into the light and Dylan couldn't help but laugh. Fucking hell, got me all hot and bothered for a goblin. Should I even waste the bullets? Don't bother, I'll cut it down with my sword. Rodney pulled his blade out and the two stepped out from behind the sandbag bunker. They were in one of the city's maintenance rooms. It was 20 feet wide with a stairway that led to the surface. It was also blessedly clear of sewage or water. Rodney gave his sword a spin as he tromped over to gut the goblin. But he stopped as nearly a dozen more poured into the room, all rushing at him with murderous gazes, all sharp teeth and claws. As they got closer, he realized they weren't goblins at all. He slashed two down with quick swipes of his blade but he was quickly overwhelmed as the creatures seemed to have no end in sight. Dylan tossed a grenade into the pack of creatures that had already killed Rodney. He quickly realized his mistake. The explosion killed a dozen of the creatures when 24 spawned in their place. He tried to fight them off using guns and magic but the more he killed the more that spawned. He was doing a fighting retreat when he tripped on the bottle of booze that had fallen to the floor in the chaos. He screamed as the creatures piled on top of him, tearing him apart. A minute later 4 people walked into the room. Damn Martin, every time I see these little buggers, they impress me more. Any downside to them? Yeah, every death reduces the uptime on this summon. They have about 10 minutes left before they disappear. Well, let's not waste any time. While our entrance didn't go unnoticed, the volume of imps was enough to surprise the defenders. They cleared the first barrier and the second before winking out of existence. It allowed us to clear a path inside the building we had come out in. These were not the Black Dragon's A-team, but they weren't stupid. The fighting grew intense as magic and the sound of weapons filled the air. Ska moved among the enemy like a wraith, critically wounding soldiers to take them out of the fight, even temporarily. Fiona fought beside me, keeping 3 enemies occupied while I fought 4. They didn't last long when I activated Unstoppable Force and Blink Step. I simply used my staff as a ram, slamming into the surprised men like a locomotive. My momentum transferred into my targets, breaking bones and crushing organs. One man thought he could stop me as he activated some skill that turned him into a walking pile of rocks. His fist slammed into my chest and his arm was turned into dust as I kept pushing forward, then I pushed through him. I think it was the sight of me covered in blood, after literally walking through someone, that caused the remaining enemies to decide this was far above their pay grade. The survivors tried to flee but Martin had covered the exit with his Breathe of Corruption spell. Anyone that survived that got hit by his whip, a void bolt, or his mana pistol. While he hadn't been adventuring in a month or so, he hadn't let his skills deteriorate. None of the enemies had escaped and I quickly surveyed the room and checked on the location of our target. He's not in this building, I can sense him a few buildings down. They are going to be ready for us, Martin added. I smiled. They aren't going to be ready for this, I said, raising my prosthetic hand. Randy stood at a table, while his commanders rushed around issuing orders. Somehow that sneaky fuck had tricked them and gotten inside the shield. No matter, he knew it was always going to come down to a fight between him and this little pissant. He wasn't afraid of the man, he had already easily bested him once. His forces might be depleted here in Chicago but once he dealt with this prick he would call in another group from New York. Everything there was stable so a skeleton crew could hold the city until he recruited more men. There were always people who yearned for power and he could give that to them. The building shook and dust rained from the ceiling. Report, he yelled. Sir, they have a portable mana cannon and have blown an entrance into the side of the building, bypassing the fortifications. God damn it, can't those fuckers do anything right? Send a squad up to reinforce them. I'll be up in a minute. The man nodded and motioned for 4 men guarding the entrance to come with him. Randy strapped his sword and armor on, double-checking that he was set. He could hear screams from above as the building shook and the fighting raged on. He ran up the stairs with his last remaining members from the first attack on Paul Fuller. Over half had been killed in the escape from the city, and subsequent journey back to Chicago. Eventually, they had killed off all of the mole men that had been doggedly chasing them. But it hadn't been without cost. When Randy got to the top of the stairs, he surveyed the battlefield. There were dead everywhere, but he still had 10 men fighting against 4, and now he was joining with 3 more. Their damn flying fortress was out of the picture, but he wasn't about to underestimate his opponent. 2 of you go keep that ghost bitch busy. The other come with me. Chapter 124, Deciding Battle. The lobby we were in was a bloodbath. I lost count of the people we had killed to get to this point. None had been elites, or above level 12. Still, they had numbers and we had to fight every inch. Martin's summoned creature had done the majority of the work until it poofed away in a cloud of haze, the spell spent. Then we had to get dirty. I deflected a sword strike aimed at my neck, smashing my staff across the offender's face to the sound of shattering bone. It was easy to see how my additional 10 stat points, from levels alone, had me head and shoulders above anyone under level 20. Even the level 16 Blade Guardian I was currently fighting was hard-pressed. His skill with a blade was far superior to my skill, but he couldn't match my speed or strength. My staff snapped out, tearing through the air with an audible crack as the warrior tried to deflect my strike with his buckler. Metal met metal and his buckler lost, caving in and snapping the man's arm. He cried out and tried to take a step back, but I fired an arcane bolt right into his face. That had been the tipping point as the man dropped his sword and tried to grab for a health injector. I jammed my staff forward, the sharp spike at the end tearing into his crotch. A spurt of blood flew out as the man let out a high-pitched squeak before collapsing to the ground. I had activated my staff's enchantment on that last strike, really giving him something to think about. If the blood loss didn't kill him, I would come back, or one of the others would do it for me. I just needed him out of the fight. I spotted my quarry coming up a set of stairs with more reinforcements. I didn't even have time to see what ability I had taken from the downed fighter. I whipped my staff back, flinging the blood off. I hadn't used any imbue on my staff because I wanted to see what worked the best against my main target. Not that it was needed beforehand. Randy spotted me immediately. He yelled some orders at his underlings and they split into 2 groups, one heading my way and the other heading for Fiona. Heads up! I yelled. The others were engaged in their own fights, but they would know what this meant. I had to trust them to take care of themselves. I couldn't spare any concentration to heal or check on them. Randy and his underling ran toward me and I spared a second to use Identify on the 2. Sebastian Blade God / 6-armed Tyrant 21/14. Randy Cotton Fate Spinner / Tempus Mech 22/17. My first thought was, what the hell is a 6-armed tyrant, but that was quickly squashed by the man growing 4 more limbs and the fact that Randy had lost a level. It had to be that damn skill of his. He had used it again to get me up here before I was ready. That explained the weird feelings I had been experiencing. Still, this wasn't going to be an easy fight. I started laughing and that seemed to only enrage the 6-armed man as he rushed at me with some dash ability. 6 deadly-looking blades appeared in his hands. I didn't back away as I cast my area of denial, Blink Step, Unstoppable Force, Wings of the Falcon, and Reverberating Strike. The man was large, world champion weightlifter large, and he seemed even larger, wearing full metal armor. But that meant nothing as I slammed into him at full speed, ignoring his swords, thanks to my shield spell. Reverberating Strike rendered all of his armor useless as I crashed into him at a ridiculous speed, thanks to my base 20 agility that was boosted by my buff, then tripled by the Blink Step spell. There was a resounding crash of metal as the man's armor caved in, the enchantments not being able to endure the abuse. I wasn't even slowed down as I came out the other side, my shield coated in his blood and remaining organs. I smiled as it was the first time I had seen doubt creep into Randy Cotton's eyes. He had sent his man in to soften me up and waste my energy, but I had dealt with him in under 2 seconds. I didn't waste the time as I blurred toward Randy. He threw out some item that popped up a magical barrier as he dodged to the side. The shield cracked like thin glass as I rocketed through it. He hadn't been my target though as I continued my charge toward 2 people fighting Fiona. I plowed into both of them, the effect not quite as spectacular. One had his arm torn off as he turned in my direction, just in time for me to impact him. The second had been shoved forward. Fiona cut them both down as they tried to recover and I turned my charge, sprinting back toward Randy. I was still laughing, or I should say laughing again. I had to pop a mana injector but the cost was worth it. I could already see the effect maddening laugh was having on the enemies. They were getting sloppier and more reckless in their attacks, allowing the others to capitalize. Unstoppable Force ran out a few seconds before I reached Randy. He was prepared, his sword jabbing out with lightning-quick speed. I didn't try to block the attack, I flung my offhand out with Orb of Darkness. He saw the attack but chose to stay the course. His sword popped my area of denial bubble and then went through my armor shield. He had aimed for the leather-clad area and the sword penetrated deep into my side, right before he yanked it out with a vicious grin. I grinned back, activating Reflect. He clutched his side and stumbled back as a gaping wound opened in his torso. I glanced at my notification to see what curse was activated. Curse of Feeble Mind applied. The man was quick to recover, his wound vanishing before my eyes. It didn't heal, it simply went away, as if it had never existed in the first place. I swore under my breath. I had hoped to use that as an opener to soften him up. But he was lunging at me less than a second later and it took all my attention to deflect his attacks. My agility was high but even with my buff, his was still higher. I now really wished that the curse had been on his agility. I could only hope that the -5 to his intelligence and -3 to his wisdom, swung the fight in my favor. Our battle was one of silence, punctuated by brief moments of extreme violence. Ice now coated my staff along with lightning. We had each scored a few superficial wounds on the other but our ability to heal or negate the damage left us looking unharmed, save for the blood. Randy was faster but not as strong as I was but he made up for that in his fighting skill, which was extremely refined. I had a hard time blocking his strikes as he weaved his damn skills into his attacks. When I thought I had a successful block, I would hit empty air, only for the sword to come darting in to tear at my body. My armor was up to the challenge in most cases, the mithril and leather doing their best to keep my insides in. Randy had similar quality armor, only with a solid plate across his breast. It wasn't shielded like mine but it was enchanted. Despite that enchantment, my staff left dents and long gouges in the protective metal. Randy knew enough not to try and block my strikes, not that he needed to, he was like a damn snake, dodging in and out before I could deal a solid blow. His enchanted armor seemed to nullify my magical effects as no ice or lightning got through when I hit those areas. Anytime we broke apart, Randy would send his sword bolts toward my jaw, trying to keep me from casting. I returned the attacks in kind, whipping out shockwaves and stunning gusts. I had tried to use other spells but the man simply sidestepped my earth-based attacks. The man glowed a golden color and leaped towards me. I was forced to cast Blink Step to avoid a wall of strikes, all seeming to punch through the space I had recently occupied. I thought I was safe but a weird feeling overcame me as I found myself standing in that space once more, the attack already here. I stumbled back, blood gushing from my mouth as I clutched one of the holes. I activated Healing Touch to stem the damage as Randy raced toward me, ready to finish me off. I grimaced but raised my hand, the 3 additional fingers snapping into place to activate the mana cannon. I fired the weapon and the world blurred again, this time Randy was back and off to the side, out of the path of the concentrated beam of death. He snarled in outrage, rushing back in. I used the hand in shield mode to fend off the attacks but his sword punched through the magical metal with ease, turning it into scrap in short order. I was still trying to heal the damage from his one attack, it was quite severe, when he sliced half the metal hand away. The remaining fingers went flying off. Now, you die. Randy readied for another attack to skewer me when something punched through his chest from behind. Randy grunted from the cold radiating pain. But he had prepared for this. He activated a magical item, and frowned when the cold didn't go away. He looked down, he expected to see a ghostly sword sticking through his ribs, not an actual metal sword. He gripped the end in a vice-like grip as he swung around, wrenching it out of his attacker's grasp. His hand was protected by his magical gauntlet. His eyes blinked in confusion for a second as he saw the solid form of a woman, one he knew to be dead. He lashed out with his blade, intending to cut the bitch in half, but she faded into smoky mist and floated away. The blade, however, stayed stuck in his gut. He cast his last remaining heal spell, Reverse Fate. The sword vanished and his wound closed up. It wasn't as good as his other spell Deny Time but it was just as effective. He whipped back around and his eyes went wide. I hadn't wasted the time Fiona bought me. I stored my broken prosthetic and replaced it with my new one. The enchantment made the lifelike facsimile blend perfectly with my skin. Only the additional weight would give it away. I activated the mana cannon, the palm splitting open as the mana charged the gem. I didn't wait on the focusing fields to stabilize as I ran toward Randy. I saw him turn as I lifted my hand toward his face. His eyes went wide as I released the stored energy. The blast was like a shotgun instead of a concentrated beam and the impact sent us both flying apart. I groaned as I picked myself up. I spotted my target 20 feet away. Half his face and upper shoulder had been melted away by my attack, but still, the son of a bitch clung to life. I saw him pull something from his ring, it looked like C4. He looked at me and went to cock his hand back to throw the explosive compound my way. I thought that was a dumb choice of item to pull out as I cast Wall of Thorns on him. He gave a look of befuddlement as the explosive got stuck on one of the thorns. After that, I simply hit the area with an arcane bolt. There was a loud boom as the baseball-sized explosive went off, turning Randy into spaghetti. My ears rang from being so close to the blast, but other than a few points of damage from debris, I was okay. I was now extremely grateful that the curse had lowered his intelligence. I doubt he would have taken that action had he been at his full faculties. I got up and brushed myself off. There were still a few people left fighting. The battle didn't last much longer once I was freed up. I healed both Ska and Martin and helped them finish off their opponents. Fiona had risked a lot to stab Randy in the back, almost dying as she fled her fight. I saw what she had become and I was going to have to ask her about that, but not now. Not everyone came out of the fight unscathed. Ska had lost an arm during the battle. He had enough presence of mind to stop the bleeding and I was able to reattach the limb with my healing. He would have to take it easy for a few days though to let the bone harden. Fiona was near death as well, due to her suicidal charge to try and distract Randy, but if she stayed incorporeal her wounds would heal. Martin had been the least injured out of all of us. His shield bubble kept the attacks at bay for most of the fighting, and when it did finally fall, he was left fighting only two of the weaker opponents. It appeared that not many people had counters to his dark occult abilities. I looked around the once proud building, it was a wreck. Steel pillars were exposed, spells and attacks having whittled away large chunks of the surrounding concrete and marble. We quickly looted the remains and left the building. But not before I set dwarven explosives on the pillars. I didn't want anything left behind to be scavenged. It took us the better part of 2 hours to clear the remaining forces from under the shield dome. I was tired but relieved. I looked at the two abilities I had stolen from Randy and his companion. Charge across a 40-foot distance at double your movement speed. Cost 50 stamina. Cooldown 10 minutes. Time Shutter, rewind or fast forward time by 1 second. Time catches up to us all, but it will catch up to you much quicker. Cost 25 stamina. Cooldown 30s. Charge was a simple skill, but I could definitely fit it into my repertoire. More speed meant more damage. Time Shutter was probably the skill Randy had been using to throw off the timing of his attacks. The ability was powerful in its simplicity, but I didn't care for the flavor text. Did that mean every time I used it I was shaving away at my lifespan? How would I even know? I decided to shelve that skill until I learned more. Maybe Victoria the Pixie could shed some light on the subject. It would also be good to check in on Old Man Trumbo and Frotsar since we were in the general area. I looked at my level and notices, man wouldn't they be surprised when they saw me next. Congratulations, the Mana system has recognized your unique achievement and unlocked the second tier of your strength attribute. Congratulations, the Mana system has recognized your unique achievement and unlocked the second tier of your endurance attribute. Unfortunately, I had been busy at the time and didn't know what achievement had unlocked the attributes. If I had to guess one, it would be the man-meat tunnel I created. That sure seemed like something strength-based. Endurance had me stumped though. Paul Fuller Mantra Enchanter / Maw of the Void level 2014. The extended fighting had rocketed my second class all the way to 14. I looked at the other three, everyone had gained a level. Martin was now 18 as was Fiona. Ska had hit 19, but I knew that last level to 20 was a slog. I levered myself off the broken car I had used as a bench. Hey Fiona, catch, I said, tossing her sword and scabbard through the air toward her. I watched her turn from her incorporeal form into a flesh and blood woman, similar to what she had been when she was alive. I raised my eyebrow and she gave me a sheepish grin. You and Martin need some alone time. Her face went red and I laughed. It felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulder after the battle. Come on, let's go visit some old friends, I said, clapping her on the shoulder and giving her a much-deserved and overdue hug. Chapter 125, The Return. We walked out of the rebel-strewn area of Chicago where the dome shield had covered. The emitter was now safely tucked into my storage ring. I had to find a clear spot to call back the fortress for it to land. So, Martin said, I see your hand grew back, was that because you killed the guy that cut it off? I gave him a confused look before I remembered I had my new prosthetic on. No, I chuckled, deactivating the meld runes and pulling the hand away. Melding the mithril alloy hand with my skin, nerves, and bones was not a pleasant experience, but it was less painful than getting a hand cut off. I handed him the hand so he could admire the workmanship. It had cost me 40,000 credits to get it made by a master craftsman. And even then that was only for an unenchanted hunk of metal that could mimic all of the movements of a normal hand and wrist. The hand looked to be made of tiny scales, and I had no clue how the crafter had assembled it, but it was a thing of beauty. It also incorporated the 6 rails that extended from within the palm. Those are what I had spent the majority of time carving my runes into. The rest of the runes allowed my mana to flow through the device to activate it like my real hand. Then there was the Odin rune again, but this time I had connected it to a rune tattooed near my stump. When the lines of the knots met, the runes activated, covering the hand with the false image of my skin. It also activated the other runes that melded the two together. Once the process was complete, I no longer had to run a trickle of mana to the hand. Unless I wanted to use it. I hadn't wanted to use it in the fight if I could help it, but I thought I might need the additional dexterity the hand could provide. Turns out there was a learning curve with the device, and I was glad I had only needed to activate the hidden mana cannon. The weapon wasn't nearly as powerful as the cobbled together one I had created before, but it was more than enough. Wow, Martin said, whistling in appreciation as he inspected the hand. So this is what you were working on. Paul's left hand. Quality, masterwork. Armor, 42. Slashing resistance, 80%. Stabbing resistance, 90%. Blunt resistance, 60%. Cold resistance, 80%. Heat resistance, 60%. Magic resistance, 5%. Lightning resistance, -25%. This item was crafted by a master to be a fully functional replacement for a missing limb. Runes have been added by an advanced rune crafter to give life to this item. Contains a chargeable mana cannon. Item has the ability to self-repair given time. This item is soul bonded to Paul Fuller and cannot be used by another. I did give up some utility by using this hand over my old one, not that my old one was in any condition to be used. The bonuses on the new hand more than made up for it. It was too bad the stats only applied to the hand itself. I would need to be careful of lightning, but my elemental defense negated most of that downside. Martin handed the hand back to me as I reattached it with a grimace. I flexed the fingers woodenly, still getting used to the odd feeling. There was some minor damage on it from my reckless use of the cannon at close range, but I could already see the bits of metal reforming. Once my camouflage covered it up, it looked like a normal hand and I couldn't tell it was damaged. Martin whistled again. I bet you spent a good chunk on that. Did you do all the runes up yourself? Yup, it took forever and was a pain in the ass. You know, I might have to get you to make me a weapon. The pistol is nice, but at our level, it is getting less and less useful as it just can't deal the damage necessary. Yeah, I can do that. We're going to visit some friends and there is a bazaar in the city. How does a demonic staff sound? Martin chuckled. Sounds fantastic. Fear the satanic Martin and his demonic minions, he yelled, throwing his arms into the air. I laughed while Fiona and Ska looked at us like we had lost our minds. The fortress touched down with a crunch, settling on the rubble pile that had once been a building. We all climbed about, exhaustion getting to us. Before I shut the door, I activated the explosives. There were 3 distant booms followed by a cloud of dust as the building came crashing down a few blocks away. I gave the city one last look, closing the door and hoping I would never have to return to this pit of despair. We slowly floated across Lake Superior, heading north. I wasn't in any hurry to return to my old home and I needed some time to think and unwind. Fiona plopped into the chair to the side, surprising me and pulling me from my contemplation. It wasn't surprising that she was in here, but that she was in her. I want to say mortal form, human form. I didn't really know. So, I said, waving my arm at her, how often can you do this? It had been a few hours since we had left Chicago and I knew at some point she had changed back into her spectral form to heal. 2 hours a day, for now. Oh, so you can tell it will increase. She shrugged, it's a strange sense I get. It feels like my humanity is slowly returning. That's good though, right? She looked uncertain. I don't know. Even now, I don't feel like I did back when I was alive. My skills from back then are gone, but I still have my skill with a sword. I guess it made sense, she wasn't the same class as she had been back then. Identify still showed her as a spectral companion, even in this form. Does it matter? You are you, no matter what your skills say. I guess not, but some part of me expected them to return, and when they didn't I felt a bit lost. The conversation went on for a bit before I changed the subject. I know I'm interesting and all, but how come you aren't spending your uptime with Martin? Her face turned beet red and I realized, I hadn't seen her or Martin since we left Chicago a good hour before she came to chat. I choked out a laugh, forgetting that she had come from a world much more chaste than ours. Sure, she had picked up some of our mannerisms along the way, but she was still a shy maiden at heart. She slapped me across the shoulder. I gave her my sternest voice. Now young lady, is that any way to act? My God, what would your paramour think if he saw you acting like a brute? She just rolled her eyes and got up. I'm going to go now. Say hi to Martin for me, I added with a wave. I heard her groan as she left. It felt good to tease her for a change. It was about time she got a taste of her own medicine for playing tricks on me all this time. The trip was uneventful. We passed the remains of Milwaukee. It smelled of death and decay even far out over the water. Not a single thing moved within the ruins of the town. After that, I cut the fortress back overland. I could see the massive forest of the kin and the grassy zone that separated the halves. I wondered if Clara was still alive. I would go and say hi, but I had no idea where their city was located. All I could see were trees. Dragon's Rend came into sight within a few hours, and from there I just followed the river north. Through the remote viewer, I had spotted plenty of life. I saw the unmistakable signs of orc hunters. I hadn't expected to see them this far south, but perhaps they had moved north from that other tribe. There were no human settlements as far as I could see. This wasn't a complete surprise. It had been 8 months since I had been here. God, it felt like a lifetime ago. In most cases, it might as well have been. I was a different person than I was back then. Back then I thought I was hot shit, able to take on any opponent and get away. How fucking wrong and stupid I had been. That ignorance had cost my only companion her life. Even though she was back, it still made me regret many of my choices. Ska and Martin had joined me in the control room as we got closer. They could all watch the viewer through their own eyes. It kind of gave a weird out-of-body experience. But you quickly got used to it. Fiona had returned to her spirit form, having exhausted her time as a human. Martin said she wanted some alone time and she had moved to the roof. I understood. I wouldn't feel all that good about returning to the scene of my death either. The town came into view in the distance. Even from here, I could see it had changed significantly since I had last been here. Large stone walls now sprouted up along the old highway, surrounding the entire town as far as I could see. I knew if the walls continued along the highway, a large section of town would be left exposed, but perhaps they had no choice. I knew the fight with the Black Dragon had decimated a large chunk of the fighting forces within the city. Hell, I didn't even know if Earth humans still controlled the city. The picture became clearer as we neared the city wall. Our cloak was hiding us from view. I could clearly see humans along the walls, but the flag they were flying definitely wasn't one I had seen before. It wasn't until Fiona re-entered that we knew what we were dealing with. It's the flag of the Asheran Kingdom, she growled. I had to think back on that one. Wait, isn't that your kingdom's flag? She nodded. I thought they could only afford to send one person through the portal. It appears they found the funding necessary, or they flat out lied to me. Any idea of what type of reception we can expect? She shook her head. I wasn't surprised. I looked at the many monocannons that lined the top of the wall and pulled the fortress back into the west. I'm going to put us down north of the city, but well outside of these walls. We can reach the town by mount easily enough. The others nodded, seeing the same excess of cannons along the wall as I did. I also activated one of my message tokens, sending it off to Frotsar. Hopefully, he would be in town and could reply. I didn't care that Fiona's kingdom had annexed the city, but I didn't want a repeat of the incident with the Mohe Council and West Exit if I could avoid it. Frotsar would be instrumental in providing us information on that front, assuming he was around. Chapter 126, Old Acquaintances. We touched down in an old quarry I knew about. It wasn't as big or as deep as I would like, but it did the job of hiding the fortress. We were preparing to leave and I was getting a feel for my new hand when Frotsar's reply arrived. Good tidings, old friend. Much has changed in your absence, but the city still stands and is safe to enter. Ask the gate guard to point you to Frotsar's fine goods. I remain open until sundown. I hope to see you soon. Well, it's good to know he was still around and had apparently opened his own shop. I doubt he would expect us tonight though. I looked at the sky and estimated we had 3 or 4 hours until sundown. We approached the city by the same bridge we had used the last time Fiona and I had entered. I was riding Bella and Martin had purchased an Arabian horse. It was quite the equine, its mane was silver gold and it had a dappled hide to match the coloring. I would have mistaken it for a regular horse if it wasn't for the blood-red eyes. Abyssal thoroughbred. Unlike Bella, this was a summoned creature. Ska walked as he normally did but he gave the horse a wide berth. Bella chittered at him in amusement as he hissed back at her. We approached the gate at a slow trot, not wanting to spook the guards. At least 10 sets of eyes tracked us as we crossed the bridge. I guess traffic at this time of day was light as we were the only group coming across. A guard halted us. State your name and business for visiting Durbinton. I wanted to roll my eyes at the name change to the town but I replied with my name and that we were here to visit the bazaar and meet with old friends. A magical item noted our information and the guard told us not to cause any trouble while we were here. He didn't look put off by our levels, then again maybe they didn't use identify on us. I know Fiona had said it was rude to do so in her world. That didn't stop me from using it on the guard though. Valiance's Bulwark Guardian level 15. It was a respectable level going by Fiona's country's standards. She had been what, level 12 when we met. What the group didn't notice was someone had used identify on them and was now running to report to their boss. This boss was someone Fiona would have instantly recognized. Lord Durbin lounged in his reading room, glass half full of some vintage local wine that was rather delightful. At first, he had been incensed at being ordered to come to this backwater planet for the sole purpose of contacting a few city guards that had been pulled over. The indignity of it was almost more than he could stomach. But upon arriving he found that the town around the bazaar had been sacked and his guide missing or dead. Seeing an opportunity he contacted his father and after expending sizable resources, they managed to teleport a decent-sized force to secure the city and fortify it. While he still felt it was a backwater, he wasn't blind to the untapped resources that abounded. He was now magistrate of the city, after bringing all the remaining malcontents into line. The final remaining hurdle had been some old hag. But she was won over eventually. Everyone wanted something and he was able to offer that to her. Durbin was happy, the land was fertile, and other than the winters was rather mild. The orc tribes that roamed the areas around the city were easy enough to deal with for his men and usually enough to get the rowdy adventurers to leave and cause trouble amongst them. So when his butler knocked on the door, Durbin frowned. "Why are you disturbing me, Gunter?" "Pardon, my lord. One of your watchers is here with a report." Durbin sat up in his chair, setting his glass on the table off to the side. There were few reasons a watcher would disturb him, and none of them were usually good. "Very well, send him in." "At once, my lord." A minute later a guard entered. He was wearing the standard leather armor of his scout forces but this man was also a part of the Watchers, a group of men he had personally picked to keep an eye out for possible issues. The man saluted before coming forward. "Report. A group of 3 people entered the city around an hour ago. All above level 18. This got Durbin's interest. People of that level were rare from his world, besides himself being level 22 in his main class and level 12 in his second class, there were no guards that had been over level 14 when they arrived. "Give me specific levels and classes." The guard passed along the information and Durbin understood why the man had come to him immediately. He had to wonder why a man at level 20 in his main class and 14 in his second class was up in this area. The local dungeons sure weren't high enough to bring someone of that level, let alone the monsters. "Thank you, you may return to your post." "My lord," the man replied with a stiff salute as he exited the room. "Gunter, fetch the messenger." The guard had given directions to Fradhar's shop. It took a good 20 minutes to get there as it was in the old downtown area. The same area that housed the bazaar and where the battle for the city and subsequent capture of myself, and the death of Fiona had occurred. We did ride past the building where she died. All signs of damage seemed to have been cleaned up, even that rampant magma elemental was gone, although those scars still remained. The city was quite a bit more lively than the last time we were here. Even the undertone of hopelessness and despair was long forgotten as people seemed to move on with their lives after the system. The shop in question wasn't hard to spot. Like his old cart, the shop was covered in colorful flags and signs. Another surprise was the lights. It seemed that someone had managed to partially repair the electrical grid as the street lights and buildings all started to come alive as evening arrived. I dismounted and stored Bella, much to her complaint, before our group walked into the brightly lit store. A magical chime dinged, letting the proprietor know that someone had arrived. I heard a familiar voice from a few aisles over. I will be with you in a moment, please feel free to browse. I couldn't help smiling. This had been the first person, well Dragon Keen, that had shown me any hospitality after the system arrived. A few minutes went by before the other customer left. Sorry about the wait, what can I, by the gods, Paul, I didn't expect you here tonight. How are you? I'm good, Frotsar. This is Martin and Ska, good friends of mine. Well, any friend of Paul's is a paying customer, he said with a toothy smile. What about Fiona Clark? I must say Commander Smithson has been quite irate about not hearing from you in so long. I managed to talk him out of sending a contractor to retrieve you, but just barely. I winced at this news. Yeah, I'll let her tell you about that, perhaps after you're closed up. Well, no time like the present. I have no more customers in the store, unless you three wish to purchase something. Perhaps later, I added, cutting off any other reply. Fair enough. Give me a minute to lock up. We can head upstairs to my home. Frotsar's home was quite nice. It was a converted 3-story building with the bottom 2 floors being part of the store. I didn't recall what used to be housed in this building, not that it really mattered. Please, sit. Would anyone like refreshments? Water is fine with me. Martin asked for water as well, but Ska asked for milk. The house was decorated much like his store. Colorful items were everywhere, leaving little living space. The sudden thought of creating a show called System Hoarders popped into my head and I chuckled internally. So, is Fiona going to be joining us? She's already here, I replied. Oh, must be a powerful stealth ability to get past my items. Fiona became visible a few seconds later, standing behind Martin. Frotsar didn't seem fazed by her appearance. Oh, so not invisibility. Well, I certainly see the issue. Sorry about your death, young one. Fiona nodded, then began to recount the story about how she ended up this way. It took around an hour for Fiona to tell the story and Frotsar was attentive the entire time. He didn't seem surprised in the least. Or if he was, I couldn't tell. That does make things difficult. I assume you are planning on visiting the commander. We nodded. I can't imagine this will put him in a good mood, but with your levels, I don't see him making too much of a fuss. When Lord Durbin took control of this town. Wait. Lord Durbin took control? Fiona asked. Oh, you weren't aware? Yes. He arrived shortly after the battle, or so I heard. With his father's assistance, he brought over 20 guards and 5 earth mages. By the time I arrived, he had already forced most of the locals to capitulate to his rule. Not that it harmed them any, they are actually doing quite well, but you know how it is, some people resent being seen as conquered. That was where his little watchers came in. Spies and assassins mostly. They helped keep the fighting to a minimum. After that, the walls went up. Weasley little bastards, Fiona hissed. They told me it was too expensive to send more than one person through. It is rather pricey, but the cost of controlling a city of this size as well as access to a bazaar was seen as a worthwhile investment. I can't say that I would have done anything differently, had I been in the Lord's shoes. So, is the commander here then? I asked. No. The thing is, when Lord Durbin took the town, he sent a messenger to Commander Smithson. Essentially he wrote off the entire garrison and told them they were on their own. I fear part of that was my fault. The Lord asked me to tell him about the conditions of the town and the route to get there. As far as I know, the commander still flies the flag of Asheron, and who knows what will transpire in the future. The commander is extremely loyal to the kingdom and Lord Durbin is really only representing the Duke, not the King. Politics, I muttered. Indeed. So, now you know what happened here, how about you fill me in on your adventures? I did, but I left out the really dark parts. Nobody wanted to hear about or relieve those. Are you four planning on staying long? No, probably only for a few nights. Then we will head north to see the commander. After that, we have to return to Texas. I must say, I am fascinated with the thing you call the fortress. Would you mind if I tagged along with you to see the commander? Perhaps my influence will help soothe his temper. Sure. Let's say the day after tomorrow. Excellent, excellent. I recommend the hotels down the street. With the return of electricity, they are fabulous. I must say the comforts of your world are divine. Thanks. I guess. By the way, who managed to restore the power? I'm not entirely sure. All I know is it is someone local the Lord hired. Ska and Martin had been mostly quiet, letting me catch up with my old friend. They did chat a bit with Frotsar and he somehow talked them into buying something. I had a good chuckle at this. Frotsar was Frotsar, and he wouldn't be a merchant extraordinaire if he didn't at least try. I was pretty sure the only reason he excluded me from his attempts at making a sale was that I had saved his life. Chapter 127, Dinner Invite. After leaving Frathar's shop we headed to the hotel. It was still a bit weird to see most of the electric street lamps running. There were a few that were dark and some were missing completely. I could only assume it was damage from battle or from them sitting around for so long unused. Part of me wanted to see what remained of my old house, but I knew it had been torched in anger after Fiona and I had escaped the first time. I decided that digging through the past was a lost cause and decided to leave it be and look toward the future. We decided on 2 separate rooms. One for Ska and me and the other for Fiona and Martin. Her relationship with Martin was like an open secret, everyone knew but nobody spoke about it. Well, except me when I ribbed Fiona about it. I had gotten my sweet revenge so there was no point for me to keep hounding her over it. I was happy for the 2. The beds were nice, not super nice but nice. They weren't pre-system manufactured beds. I imagined those had not fared well in the abandoned hotel. I wondered who had decided to keep it running after the system but decided that tracking down that sort of information was pointless and a waste of my time. Unless the person that ran the place had a beef with me or I with them, I saw no upside to having this info. Which reminded me that I needed to use my Reaper title to scan for Stygian Order members. After concentrating for a bit I got a weak hit far to the south, near the edge of my range. It vanished shortly after. Stone was inspecting the fallout of the Chicago disaster. Nobody had predicted either side to walk away from this conflict alive, but that was the problem with predictions, they weren't 100% accurate. For the most part, their order didn't involve themselves. Only when things started to spiral out of control did they get involved, as they did early on in the Chicago and New York conflicts. Mainly to weaken the efforts of the Black Dragons, leading to their predicted downfall. It happened much faster than they had predicted though, and it was a scramble to keep everything from falling apart. It also earned them the enmity of a focal point or someone whom predictions seemed to gravitate around. The predictions had been 98% certain both parties would meet their ends at this battle. Having a prediction be that high was rare, and the only other time a prediction had gotten to that point was with the Enterier Locusts. That little mishap had prompted the Council to authorize the use of a nuclear weapon to be deployed. Stone had seen to the deployment herself. None of the frightened townsfolk had even known she was there. She simply popped out through a portal, set the device, and left through the same portal. It had worked, successfully eliminating the threat, but the cost was high. Not that she wouldn't sacrifice 1,000,000 lives to save the planet. Hell, their order had doomed billions when they activated the system node ahead of schedule. It had been another necessary step to preventing organizations like the Black Dragon and others from fulfilling even more vile plans for the planet. Stone was shaken out of her ruminations when she fell through a portal. She hit the ground with a thump. What the hell? Sorry, Counselor Stone, we had to pull you out, you were detected, a worried technician said. Detected? Detected by what? She asked, not having spotted a single person within the city. Our analysts are trying to figure that out, but for safety's sake, we decided it was prudent to pull you back. She brushed her clothes off as she stood. Fine, I need to make a report anyway. Let me know what the analysts determine. Sleep came quickly, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't wake in the middle of the night, clutching my weapon. Not that it wasn't close by. The shower was hot, an unexpected surprise, but it wasn't as opulent it may have been. I mean, the fortress had hot showers as well. But I imagined people would pay just for the shower alone. I stepped out of the shower and was going to put my armor back on when I remembered it was still covered in blood. With a sigh, I headed back to the bathroom and began scrubbing the blood out of the armor. I made a mental note to tip the hotel staff for the inconvenience of having to clean up after me. I was about to imbue my staff with fire to help dry my armor when my gaze settled on the hairdryer. I walked over and clicked the power button and it hummed to life. Something about this simple act just made me so happy, and I whistled a tune while I dried my armor. I heard Ska groan in the other room. My whistling must have woken him up. He declined a shower, having cleaned off in the fortress. At least his hair had started growing out. He looked less like a mange-ridden cat with each day. We exited the room and I knocked on Martin's door. Go away, he groaned. I chuckled. We will meet you downstairs for breakfast, get your ass in gear. I heard something thump against the door as Fiona replied. We'll be down in half an hour. The hotel had elevators but I wasn't about to put my trust in them, so we walked down the stairs and headed toward the bar/cafe. My eyes fell on a man wearing frilly clothing and looking a bit overdressed. He was heading toward us but I didn't see any weapons. Not that I wasn't ready to pull my own out with a thought and pummel the man with my staff. I decided to use identify, and got nothing. Weird. The man stopped a few feet away and held out a paper card of some sort. Pardon me, sir, Lord Durban would like to invite you and your acquaintances to dinner tonight. I will be your escort to dinner if you choose to accept this invitation. I eyed the unidentified man with caution but snapped the paper out of his hand with a quick grab. Seeing that its duty was fulfilled, the man popped, like a damn soap bubble, leaving nothing behind. Projection of some sort, I mumbled. Ska agreed, growling in annoyance. The hotel staff behind the counter had watched the whole affair, eyes wide. Hey, you behind the counter, do you know who that was? Oh, that was the Lord's messenger. Guess you can't kill the messenger for delivering bad news if the messenger isn't there. I looked at the card, it was indeed just a simple handwritten invitation to dine with His Grace Lord Fancy Pants. I would talk with Fiona and Martin about it during breakfast. They were the diplomatic ones out of the bunch, not I. So, what do you two think? I asked, over breakfast. Fiona and Martin had taken over 40 minutes to come down but we weren't in a rush. Well, in my world it wouldn't be possible to refuse an invitation from a noble. I can't imagine him having any ill intent though, otherwise, he would just have had the city guard round us up and toss us in jail. Unless he thinks we're too strong to do that, Martin added. Fiona let out a slight laugh. Don't get so high and mighty, Mr. Level 18. Kingdoms have ways of dealing with higher-leveled individuals. You saw one deterrent on the walls. Fiona was right, anyone with a modicum of mana and even those without could use the weapons. I wasn't sure I would survive a full power attack from one of those things. Do you think we should go? I asked. She shrugged. He probably wants something. Well, we might as well go. Honestly, if Martin weren't here I would just leave, but since he is, we can put him to work, I added, smiling at my friend. Oh, ha, make a poor guy work when he should be enjoying a vacation. I was going to make a quip about resting when you were dead, but with Fiona around, I thought it was in poor taste and kept the thought to myself. Why do you think I brought you along? It sure wasn't so you could bogart all of Fiona's free time. Speaking of, will you have any available today to join us at the dinner? Her face turned beet red and that was enough answer for me. Ahem, anyway, I have to visit the bazaar to speak with some people. Anyone care to join me? I got 3 negative replies and huffed. Fine, I'll meet you guys, and gal, back here around 6. That should be plenty of time to get ready for this dinner. This bazaar was much as I remembered it. It took me a good hour to find Victoria's stall though. Hey Victoria, how's my favorite skill seller and pixie doing? Oh, it's you. You here to mock my store again, or to buy? The pixie asked. Ouch, that was like 8 months ago. I said I was sorry, back then, actually I can't remember if I did apologize to her. Anyway, I have a few questions about some skills I picked up. That was probably not the right thing to say as her attitude turned sour. I tried to placate the glowing pixie woman. Slow down, don't get mad. I didn't buy them from another vendor, I got them as part of my class. She stared at me intently for a second. Maw of the Void, not a class I am familiar with. What skill did you have a question about, and this information isn't free? 1,000 credits per skill. I hit a win CE and paid the woman. It's a skill called Time Shudder. Does it have any harmful effects? You shouldn't have that skill, she said, looking at me strangely. What kind of class is your second class? I would prefer not to say. Fine, she harumphed, it'll cost you another 1,000 then. This time I grumbled my displeasure as I handed over the money. That seemed to pacify her. The answer to your question is yes. Could you elaborate? Fine. You can't alter time without first taking it from somewhere else. Where do you think that time comes from? But what about extended lifespan from having high endurance? She chuckled at this. Where did you hear nonsense like that? At most you may live a few years longer, depending on your race. Unless of course you break through your racial barrier to Tier 2. Even then it only adds a couple of decades. So it's too dangerous to use, I mumbled. Hardly, she said, flying around my head like a mosquito. I doubt you could use it enough to shave a significant portion off of your lifespan. Thanks. I guess. What about fate-based skills? What about them? She asked coyly, flying back to sit on her bench. I handed her some more money and she smiled. Stay away from those, they are far more dangerous than time-based abilities. And only a complete fool would mix the two together. Why is that? Gods mainly. They don't take kindly to people playing with fate. Unlike with time, fate affects everyone, not just the caster, even using simple level 1 abilities. Users of fate skills tend to die rather quickly when they dabble with fate. I decided not to mention Randy Cotton. Thanks for the info, even if it was pricey. Not a problem, sweetie, she said with a big smile. So you wanna buy any skills? She greedily inquired. Not Todd, you know what, there is a skill I want to buy. I didn't want people to keep asking me about my second class. I could imagine what would happen when word got out that I stole abilities from people. Do you have any skills to obscure my information from spells like Identify? Sure, do you want the basic bland one that just blocks everything, or did you have something specific in mind? Something that allows me to show fake information. Oh, now we're talking. I would recommend Obfuscate. It allows you to choose what the other person sees. There are other skills but they only make the person see what they think they should see. And if more than one compares notes, well, the jig is up. How much? I ask warily. For you, only 5,000 credits. I paid the little devil in disguise. She had managed to wheedle out almost half my remaining funds during our short conversation. I took the skill plate and checked it over. Obfuscate, passive ability, allows you to choose what information can be deduced through Identify or hide it entirely. Skill relies on your intelligence stat and can be overcome by anyone with a higher perception. Damn it, she conveniently failed to mention that the skill could be seen through. Not that I had to worry overly much. Someone would need 26 perception to break through. I quickly changed it to display my second class as something else. I had to think for a bit about what I wanted it to say. For now, I just chose Tempusmech, Randy Cotton's second class. If I thought of something better I would change it. It didn't much matter to me, I got what I came for and I could drop the fake friend act and move on to my next goal. Finding Old Man Trumbo took a bit of work. He wasn't with the normal trainers this time around. Luckily some of the trainers knew where he could be located and I eventually found his stall. Ah, young man, you have finally returned. And with a second class no less, he said with a raised eyebrow. And a skill to hide what you truly are. I froze at this and he simply chuckled. Relax, I have no issue with your class or need to hide it. Are you here to show me how you have grown over the last 10 levels? Yes, although, I fear I might disappoint you, I haven't had time to practice as much as I would like. Let me be the judge of that, come on then. What about payment? I asked. That will depend on if I decide to train you further, now stop stalling. The sparring session ended a few minutes later with me on my ass. You have improved, perhaps not through hours of practice as you yourself admit but through combat instead. It is telling in your movements, the decisiveness to go for a killing blow is in every attack. It is not that path I would have chosen but sometimes life chooses for us. So will you teach me? I asked as I gulped in a deep breath of air. No. Hey, but you said you would teach me. I said no such thing. And my teachings would only hamper you further. Your path must now be your own. Trust your instincts and you will be fine, he replied sagely. I wanted to argue with the man, pointing out that he had just handily hooped me in combat, but I stopped myself. I reflected on our duel and replayed the fight in my head. What I realized was that he hadn't used a single advanced technique to win the fight. It had just been his decades of experience that led him to be the victor. I rose from the ground and bowed. Thank you. He nodded slightly in return and I walked out. Chapter 128, Dinner is served. With nothing left to do, I sold a few rune-crafted items to restore my funds and headed back to the hotel. I had a few hours to kill before dinner so I went over my books on runes. I didn't glean any new knowledge from the books but it was nice to go over them every now and then. I also browsed my notes. They needed to be updated, some of my postulations were wildly inaccurate or just plain wrong. Most of that was on my attempts at enhancing my body. Something that I had put on the back burner due to current events. The fight had only heightened the fact that I still wasn't strong enough. Sure, I had won, but I had a feeling fate stepped in to help on that after talking with Victoria. While the Black Dragon was effectively no more, there were still dangers out there. The Stygian Order, Lord Victi, and all these groups moving in from other worlds. Sure, they weren't directly opposed to me, but that didn't mean they weren't dangerous. I had also noticed that wildlife was growing stronger. Not to mention the horrors at the bottom of the rift. I needed to keep ahead of these threats, and the only way to do that was to level. I knew that Martin would be leaving again to go back to his work with Houston and the Marshal once we returned. I planned on telling Fiona to stay with him this time. I didn't care if she was bound to me, she wasn't my slave and she deserved to be happy. As for Ska, he would probably stick with me, but I couldn't be certain. Being alone again scared me, more so than almost dying. I couldn't force them to stay though, and decided I would have to start making more friends if that was the case. My thoughts put me in a bit of a dark mood and I decided to focus my mind elsewhere. I pulled out some random jewelry I had purchased and started rune crafting. My initial efforts were utter garbage as I still wasn't used to my new hand. But I slowly improved my control. I continued this work until I heard a knock at the door. "Paul, you in?" Martin spoke from the other side. "Yeah, 1sec, I'll get the door." Walking over, I unlocked the door. "Come in, what's up?" "Fiona wanted me to give you this," he said, walking over to the bed and laying out a tux. I groaned, "Do I have to wear this?" "If I have to, then so do you." "I'm going to go get ready, you may want to do the same." "Fine," I grumbled. "Where's Ska?" Martin shrugged, laying something on Ska's bed. I looked at the bow tie and laughed. I showered, trimmed my unruly mop of hair into something shoulder length and acceptable, and trimmed my beard. I now looked less like a murder hobo. The suit Fiona had picked out fit me well. I had lost any semblance of my old world paunch in the last 8 months. Now my muscles were taut and deadly. It made me look rather elegant in the suit. How she had gotten my size so accurately was beyond me. I would have to thank her. When I got out of the bathroom, Ska was sitting on the bed with the bow tie around his neck. I could tell it made him uncomfortable as he was constantly trying to adjust it. "Just leave it alone," Martin said, admonishing the Grimalkin. Ska hissed in annoyance, "It feels like someone is trying to choke me. If you keep playing with it, it'll only make the feeling worse. Try to ignore it." Ska rumbled in discontent but put his arm down. "Good, now that Paul is ready, we can go." When we got downstairs we found the same messenger from the morning waiting for us. "If you would be so kind as to follow me, there is a carriage waiting outside." I was expecting some horse or animal-driven carriage but instead saw what looked like an early car. I realized this must be one of those Mana engine-driven carriages Fiona had told me about. The 3 of us piled into the back as the messenger hopped into the usual driver's seat for a carriage. The ride was slow and I could have jogged faster than the stupid thing, but eventually, we arrived at our destination. It appeared that the Lord had taken up residence along the river, in one of the larger abandoned homes. It also appeared that he had the homes around it leveled and a new residence was being erected. I just shook my head at the wasteful opulence. It said a lot about the man we were going to meet and I wasn't thrilled about it. Even Martin had a slight frown on his face, but he hid it as soon as we stopped. We followed the silent guide into the house and into a dining room. The table wasn't those massive oversized things that they showed in movies. It was large, though probably able to seat 12 or more people. "Please have a seat, the Lord will be with you in just a moment," the messenger gestured to the chairs. Before we even had time to sit, a tall skinny man wearing an elegant formal suit entered. It was more in the vein of a military-style dress uniform than a standard tuxedo, and it made me feel underdressed. "I apologize for my tardiness, I had a matter to take care of, please sit." "So, why are we here?" I stated flatly. "To eat, of course, I would prefer if we discuss business after the meal." I sat down, deciding to enjoy the free meal, and see what this man wanted after. So long as he didn't try poisoning us, that was fine. I took the opportunity to use Identify on the man. "Lord Gabriel Durbin, Royal Inquisitor / Expert Fencer 22/12." The Lord seemed to notice my use of the skill as he looked up and quirked his eyebrow, but he said nothing. I was honestly surprised at his low level. Another surprise was his first class of Royal Inquisitor. I assumed it was similar in scope to Miss Farley's class. I had looked at the class when I hit 20 out of curiosity. It seemed to be a class dedicated to getting people to speak and to tell the truth. Essentially an investigator. Although, it was different from that Michael fellow from the Black Dragons that we tossed into the abyss. 2 other people who I assumed were the staff, came in carrying trays of food. Dishes were placed in front of each of us and they made a hasty exit. King Asheron IX, we give our blessings unto you for this bountiful feast, and may your reign be long and enlightened. Now, let us eat. I suppressed the urge to roll my eyes as I took the ornate silver cover off my plate. Despite the pomp and overly formal start, the food was delicious. Leave it to people with too much money and a whole bunch of free time to take food to the next level. The meal was 3 courses, with the staff clearing our plates and bringing in new ones quickly. The meal was mostly a silent affair, broken only by the sound of chewing food. Mostly from Ska. Grimalkin aren't the chew quietly type, but the Lord didn't raise a fuss over it, making me think he had more tact or had dined with Beastkin before. A server kept our drinks full, one some sort of wine and the other water. I chose to stick to the water, not wanting to muddle my head for the discussion that came after. Martin didn't seem to share my sentiment as he enjoyed a few glasses of the beverage. But I had seen the Cajun put away a 12-pack without it hampering him, so I wasn't worried. The meal ended and the staff cleared up the remaining food and dishes. Thank you for the company, it is rare that I get to enjoy it. Now, I can imagine you have questions. I will answer the one you asked before. I'm curious as to why someone of your level, or that of your friends, are in this neck of the woods. While I personally find the area outside of Little Challenge, it is undoubtedly wildly dangerous for most. I doubt the orcs are enough of a challenge to bring you here, so why? I noticed he didn't really answer my question but instead asked one of his own. I decided to give him my version of the truth. I used to live here, well a bit to the east but in the town all the same. Oh, how fascinating. Have you come far to return to your old home? So your only reason for bringing us out of curiosity? I asked instead. Not entirely, the man smiled slightly. Although as you can imagine with my class, solving riddles is quite enjoyable for me. But I have to temper that by keeping my subjects safe. So you just come in and take over and nobody gets a say in the matter? I said, raising my voice and seeing Martin wince. Lord Durban only laughed lightly, hardly. Do you know what state this city was in when I arrived? It was anarchy. I doubt there were enough fighters to protect even a few blocks of the city. Through great expense, I brought over capable men to help secure the city and raise a defensible wall. Everyone is free to leave if they so choose, but those who chose to stay need to conform to the rules of law as written down in the Asheron Kingdom. You will excuse my friend, Martin added, cutting off my next tirade. Our old country was very patriotic. It's difficult to see it being cut up and parceled off like so. I took no offense. And I can understand his sentiment. But that was the past, and this is now. Even in my world, the strong rule over the weak. Be glad it was the Asheron Kingdom and not one of the other countries. There are far worse things than being ruled over. Yes, there are, Martin added quietly. But we have gotten off topic. I brought you here in part to determine if you were a threat to my city, or if you could be an asset. I don't plan on sticking around long. That's fine, and honestly, probably for the best. High-level people tend to make others nervous. Just you being here will cause trouble, whether you want to or not. But since you are in the area, I was wondering if you could do something for me. It depends on what that something is. But my rate isn't cheap and I am a recognized bounty hunter by the Enchanters Guild. The Lord's demeanor turned a bit sour at the mention of the Enchanters Guild. I had hoped they had not gotten a foothold yet, but I guess that was wishful thinking on my part. And payment shouldn't be an issue. My first request is for you to eliminate the orc leadership, they are starting to become a nuisance and people have gone missing. Why not just put a bounty board up and have the locals take a crack at him? The Lord frowned, they have, none have come back. If you hadn't shown up I was prepared to hire a contractor from the bazaar to take care of the problem. I mulled over the request. I didn't much care for the orcs, but I didn't wish them all dead either. Then again, they were sentient and I might gain some new skills out of it. And what of the other request? Simple, retrieve the kingdom's crest from a wayward garrison. I internally winced at this, knowing exactly what he was talking about. That might be the more difficult request. And I suppose they are just going to hand it over. The Lord laughed, probably not, but the man is if nothing else, loyal to his king. I will give you my seal and with that in hand, he should turn it over. Otherwise, he risks being labeled a traitor. Why not send them a message and have them bring it here? I have tried, but the messages go unreturned. Without my seal to prove I am who I say I am, he is not breaking any laws of the kingdom. And you haven't gone there because I have a city to run and very few people loyal to the crown to help me do so. But you trust me to do this? Heavens no, I was going to have someone go with you, but the fact that you have a guild-approved seal means you are at least worthy of some trust. So, what say you? I looked at Martin and Ska. Martin shrugged noncommittally and Ska nodded his head, wanting a fight. All right, we'll take on this mission. The next few minutes were spent settling on the price of our cooperation. For most, the 10,000 credits would be a sizable amount. For me, it was not as important. I had Martin and Ska split the money. Fiona still couldn't hold anything in her ghostly form other than her old sword. I figured it was due to the sword belonging to her. I knew the man was just using me for his goals, but I didn't care. It played into what I was planning on doing and we were going that way anyway. The orc issue was just the frosting on the cake. Chapter 129, The Orc Menace. After leaving the Lord's residence we were driven back to the hotel. Martin was quiet on the ride back and I decided to ask why. What's up? You haven't said a word since we left. Oh, nothing, I just figured I would wait for you to talk and tell me what to do since you seem to want to make decisions for me as well as everyone else. Sorry, I just thought since you didn't say anything during the meeting it was fine. Martin shook his head. You should have told him you would think it over. You keep getting involved with these powerful people and it never ends well, for any of us. You should have said something then, I added heatedly. Martin sighed, that would just show him you weren't in control. That is the kind of man you don't show weakness in front of. It isn't his level you need to worry about, but his ability to manipulate people. I may not have been born with a silver spoon in my mouth like him, but I can sense a con man from a mile away. That man, Martin added, gesturing back toward the house, was a born and bred con man. I let out a sigh as I collapsed back into the seat. I wasn't worried about our conversation being overheard by the driver. It appeared that there was a noise-cancelling enchantment on the carriage. So what do we do? Nothing now. We play his little game and try to get out before we get chewed up and spit out. My guess is it has something to do with this commander he wants you to meet up with. I nodded, probably, I am familiar with the man. Martin sat up at this news. You are, how? I realized I had never discussed meeting the commander with Martin. It appears Fiona hadn't spoken about him either. He was, or is Fiona's commander, depending on how you look at it. That's how we initially met. I was given a mission from the man to bring her here, so she could bring Lord Durbin up there to reinforce the garrison. But as you well know, shit kinda went sideways. Martin rubbed his temples. I didn't think that was the same commander you were talking about last night, then again I was drinking a lot. So, I'm guessing our reception will be worse than expected. I shrugged. Well, let's hurry up and get these tasks completed. I want to get back to the work I was doing in Texas. Seeing things here only reinforces the need to build a united front. The rest of the trip back was quiet, only broken by Ska's snoring. I envied the Grimalkin for his ability to sleep at any time. You ready to go? I asked Frotsar. Almost, I just need a few more items for trade and then we can be on our way. I chuckled at his need to make every trip an opportunity to make some credits as I watched him sort through items, some vanishing into his storage rings. It appeared he hadn't replaced his magical cart. Probably for the same reason he decided to open a shop instead of visiting other local towns to trade. All right, I'm as ready as I can be. I'm sure they will be happy with whatever you bring. Now we got about 10 miles to go before we get to the fortress. Do you have a mount? No, I could never stand riding another creature, it just felt weirdly wrong. Okay, fair enough. It'll take a bit longer to get there then. Oh, also we have to take a slight detour and deal with the orcs, I added. A pity, they would have made a decent trading partner if they didn't try to kill everyone that visited them. Our trip back to the fortress hadn't been as slow as I had feared. The area around the city was relatively clear of monsters and the few that did wander our way were quickly dealt with by Ska, Martin, or Fiona. I stuck near Frotsar as we chatted. You never did say how your trip south went. I asked. It was dangerous but thanks to your directions, not nearly as bad as I expected. I was able to avoid most of the nasty critters in the area and I think that force you told me about must have cleared most of the countryside on their move south. It took a few months before dangerous wildlife began to return to the area. At least they were good for something, I mumbled in reply. Yes, it's good to know they are no longer a threat, it will make living here a bit easier. I do worry about the creatures though, their levels seem to keep rising. Eventually, they should hit some unseen cap, but who's to say when that will be? I nodded at this, having witnessed the phenomenon as well. It wasn't like the planet had zones of low-level creatures for easy experience. It had only seemed that way early on because everything was new, except the creatures and people brought over from other worlds. We're almost there, mind hitting us with your illusion magic? Not at all, are you expecting enemies? I always expect trouble, I replied. I felt the magic of Frathar's illusion settle over me. It felt odd having someone else's magic on me, and I didn't remember feeling this way the previous time he had used it. I figured it had to do with either my higher perception or Tier 2 intelligence. I also realized I had never had anyone cast defensive magic on me other than myself or Fratsar. We quietly ran through the town and toward the fortress. I was glad I asked to use the illusion magic to cover us. A group of 10 orcs was standing at the ramp leading into the quarry. A quick check beyond showed 3 dead orcs on the ramp to the entryway of the fortress. The scarred door was still present, if sloppily patched, meaning they were not able to get in. A quick identify showed that the orcs were all around level 15. It was higher than the Lord had said they would be, and I suspected his intel was not as accurate as he claimed. I motioned for the others to spread out and ready themselves for the attack. About half the group of orcs was facing toward us while the others were facing into the quarry and arguing about what to do. I decided to take that option away and cast Wall of Thorns between the two groups. There was a few startled yelps of surprise, but the orcs were quick to act, not that it helped them. Martin fired a dark bolt of energy from one hand and his mono pistol from the other, targeting the same orc. Fiona tore hers apart in a flurry of sword strikes, not letting the orc even draw its weapon. Ska leaped from the illusion, turning into a missile of fur and death as he raked bloody furrows through 2 orcs that stood close together. I simply used unstoppable force, charge, and blink step to barrel through the remaining 2, as well as tearing through my wall of thorns. I took a bit of damage from the impact with the thorns as they were magical in nature. This allowed the orcs on the other side of the wall time to prepare for my charge, striking out at me with bows and wickedly shaped swords. I fended off one blade with my metallic hand while ramming my staff, point first into the highest leveled orc in front of me. Within the first few seconds, the orc force had been reduced from 10 to 3. The remaining 3 bolted, using skills to enhance their speed. I whipped out a shockwave from my staff, clipping one and sending him sprawling into the dirt. Another looked back to try and see if he could save his friend, but Ska pounced on him, dragging him down as well. The last remaining orc disappeared into the forest around the city before we could catch him. But I made sure to tag him for Reaper to find. While I hadn't been expecting orcs to be here, following that one back would make our job so much easier. I heard Fratsar clear his throat behind us. Well, I must say, that was violent, impressively so. Sorry about that, we tend to fight creatures that are quite a bit more difficult, and acting fast and ruthless is really the only way to handle them. You won't get any complaints from me, the merchant said with a toothy smile. I hadn't gotten any abilities from the orcs, mainly because they died so quickly I hadn't had a chance to activate my spell. Being able to sneak up on them had made the fight rather one-sided. I hoped the fight with the orc leader went as easily. I could soften them up with the fortress, but if I killed the orc leader that way I wasn't going to get any skills. Plus I think Ska wouldn't forgive me. He hadn't had a good fight since Chicago. I thought about it for a bit before deciding not to use the fortress to attack. If Martin wanted to stay behind because it would be more dangerous, I wouldn't fault him for that. Everyone ready to go? Are we tracking the last one? Ska crooned. Yup, but we won't be using the fortress, you all okay with that? Ska nodded enthusiastically. Sure, I need to test out another summon anyway, Martin added. Fiona just shrugged. Alright then, let's go. We didn't go quite right away. Fratsar wished to remain behind in safety. He wasn't a fighter and I could understand his worry. He was still only level 15. While you could gain levels as a non-combatant, they were slower. I didn't know what Fratsar's requirements were to gain experience, but I imagined it had something to do with selling stuff. He could still earn experience from killing, it was just significantly reduced. I decided to compromise, lifting off in the fortress to bring it closer to our attack site. This way Fratsar would be safe and we had a fallback point if the planned attack went to shit. Fratsar would remain behind alone. I trusted the Dragon King as much as I did Ska, Fiona, and Martin. He also had no way to operate the fortress. So the most he could do is look through the remote viewer while we were gone. I would have to leave the internal defenses offline, but that should be fine. The damaged outer door and intact inner door could keep anyone out for quite some time. Here, I said, handing Frotsar a small metal slate. What's this? It's an alert token. Snap it in half and it will notify the paired plate on this necklace that you are in trouble, I said, holding up the small metallic necklace I was wearing. That's rather ingenious. Did you make it? I nodded. I had stolen the idea from the ring that Charla Cotton had worn. The plate was not as refined though and could only cover about 20 miles. I might be able to sell that if you would be willing to make more. I laughed, sure, but after we finish our task with the orcs and the commander. Then it's a deal, Frotsar said, holding out a clawed hand for me to shake. I accepted the hand. The item was simple, having only 2 runes. I could whip out 10 sets in short order. They didn't even have to be metal, it was just what I had laying around that fit the size I needed. It was rather boring floating unseen above the terrified orc as he ran around the forest. He kept checking his trail to make sure he wasn't being followed before finally making off toward the mountains in the west. We watched as he met up with more groups of hunters. It appeared that he told the story of what happened before hurrying off. Seeing an opportunity, I dropped Fiona and Ska off to deal with each group of hunters the lone orc ran into. Well, any that didn't decide to turn around and go home. It turns out most were like that group I had met so early on, incensed at their kin's deaths and eager to kill the culprits, no matter the information that was relayed to them. On some level, I respected their drive to protect their kin. But it was too little, too late. Had they been willing to negotiate with the other people sent out to meet with them, perhaps I would have felt bad about killing them. No, that time had come and gone, now it was time to deal with the threat. By the time the marked orc reached a large village, Fiona and Ska had killed over a dozen hunting parties, ranging from 4 to 8 orcs. Their levels were anywhere between 10 and 14, none being as high a level as the first group we encountered. I wondered idly if that had to do with available prey. Surely they must have scoured most of the area near their village with this many hunting groups. The ones going farther afield gaining more experience. Finding a spot to set the fortress down proved difficult. I settled on an overgrown gully. The fortress landed, leaning to the side a bit as the landing gear attempted to compensate for the angle. It helped a little, but it was the best we could do. There were no other areas clear of trees unless we made one. All right, we got about a 10-minute hike, you all ready? I got affirmatives from the others. I nodded back and smiled at Frotsar. We should be back in a few hours. I would recommend not leaving the fortress. Trust me, I will not be stepping foot outside. I leave the adventuring to the adventurers. Give me a safe road any day of the week. The 4 of us stepped outside and Martin got busy summoning his creature. An area of black tar formed on the ground, bubbling up and releasing a horrendous smell. Out of that bubbling soup, plopped what looked like a slime. It took on more human-like features though, with a discernible head and arms. They were all featureless, but you could sense when the creature looked at you. As with most of Martin's summons, it gave me the creeps. It's a demonic tar slime, Martin said, looking at the creature. Any idea what it's capable of? Nope, but should be interesting. Well, let's make it scout, that smell is making me nauseous. Wait, it smells? Must be caster immunity or something. What's it smell like? It smells how it looks, like tar and sulfur and rot. Ugh, really? Okay, go scout ahead, he waved to the creature. Ska will scout as well, but far away from the demon beast, it overwhelms the local sense. All right, we will be a minute behind. It came as no surprise when I heard the first horns of the orcs. They were far off, but it seems the rancid smell had carried even to them. Other horns followed as other hunting groups started to converge on the tar creature. Fiona, go get Ska, see if you two can ambush a hunting party, Martin and I will stay back and pick off the ones coming in from our rear. Fiona nodded, quickly flying off in the direction Ska had gone. While Martin and I found a good place to ambush the group. We located a small rise, no more than a few feet, but the sandy soil it was made from made it hard to climb. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. The horns were closing in and I could tell that 2 groups were coming from the rear now as the distinct horns from each group grew closer together. Martin cast his protective dome while I cast wall of thorns on the top of the rise. It would only slow them down, but that should buy enough time to plan. 14 orcs burst from the tree less than 20 feet from the rise. They spotted us instantly and the archers in the group started firing. They hadn't even tried to discern our purpose here, just naked aggression. Up until this point I held on to a tiny bit of hope that Lord Durban had been lying about the missing adventurers. But this sealed the deal. Arrows enhanced with abilities impacted Martin's shield, causing it to ripple but otherwise doing no damage. As far as I knew, Martin could feed his entire mana pool into keeping the shield going. While an excellent defense, it made him unable to move from the spot and limited his offensive capabilities. This was why his summon was so important. But it was off doing its own thing, so I had to be the offense here. I cracked my neck and produced my staff, rushing toward the nearest group. They had split up to surround us as I had hoped. Without my ability to use Aura of Rage without crippling myself, I had to take care of how many intelligent creatures I fought. Unlike mindless beasts, these could harm me. One of the orcs rushed at me, growing almost a foot and moving quite a bit faster. He swung a massive flat-faced sword to cleave me in half. I smiled, intercepting the strike with my staff and redirecting the blow to the side. I grunted in surprise at the strength behind the blow but was able to overpower him anyway. Just before the attack finished, I imbued my staff with electricity, sending a paralyzing bolt of power up the orc's weapon. He twitched as his muscles locked up, giving me the tiniest of opening as I jammed my staff into his gut and released a shockwave. The whole orc's body rippled from the impact before it was sent hurtling into two others behind him. Holy shit, I didn't expect that to happen. The three weren't dead, but they would be slow at rejoining the fight. Now I could have easily ended this fight the same way I attacked the group of orcs at the quarry, but I needed to test some combinations out and this was the best way to do it. An arrow blasted into my armor, my shield absorbing the blow, but the flash of energy blinded me for a split second as another sword tried to slice my head off. My shield flared again and I realized, I needed to focus and take the fight more seriously. As the next attack came in, my hand snapped out, wrenching the orc's arm and bringing him in close, where I headbutted him as I activated Calcifying Strike. It was another learning experience as both his arm and forehead started to turn to stone at the same time. He stumbled back as I slammed my staff down, activating Shockwave. The quickly petrifying orc fell to the ground where his arm and forehead shattered in a bloody display. Another arrow slammed into my shield, and I could tell it was almost depleted. In this battle, I had made sure to grab some abilities. Each target counted as a fight, so I could use it once on each orc if I chose to. I would go through them after. For now, I cast Charge and Bold over any orc in my way as I ran toward the archers. They saw me coming and dropped their bows to pull out their swords, but they were a second too slow as I activated Time Shudder for the first time. It appeared as the world stopped, allowing me to continue moving as I had been. In that time I also cast Unstoppable Force. The flow of time returned and the first orc's eyes widened as I slammed into him, trampling him underfoot as I continued unabated through his friends behind him. That's when the real carnage began. Blink Step along with underhanded blow made a mess of the orcs. I even pulled out Double Strike and Flurry, forgetting I had upped my agility and my flurry now delivered 20 strikes so rapidly even I couldn't track them. The fight quickly turned into a rout as the few remaining orcs tried to flee. But I wasn't letting them get away. I released Bella to go after a few, while I chased the last three. They really had no chance. I was more agile, even without my skills. Although, I did have to employ a second casting of Blink Step to catch one orc with a similar ability. My armor was scratched from the fighting and I had taken a few slashes to the exposed areas of my body, a few on the arms and one across my neck, that I was thankful didn't decapitate me, but those were healing as my spells went to work. Martin found me a few minutes later, as I was trying to wipe the blood from my staff. I should really add self-cleaning to my weapons, I hate cleaning this shit off. Might not be a bad idea, maybe self-repair too, he added, looked at my general appearance. I looked down at my armor, it was covered in blood and other bodily fluids as well as numerous shallow cuts. It was strange, unlike the fight with Randy Cotton and the Black Dragon, this fight while dangerous didn't feel life-threatening at all and I had taken just as much damage. I knew I should stop being so blasé about fights. From my experience a level 15 could kill a level 20 just not as easily. Something about allowing myself to be injured made the fights feel more visceral. It was a dangerous mentality to have and I would need to curb that tendency if I wanted to stay alive. Nothing would lead to dying faster than underestimating an opponent. Chapter 130, Orc Chief. I could hear horns in the distance but they were moving away. It appeared that the orcs had finally realized something was happening. My guess was they would return to the village to protect the women and children. It wasn't my goal to wipe out the orcs, and I wasn't going to go around killing non-combatants if I could help it. Seeing as our fight was concluded for the moment, Martin and I went in search of Ska and Fiona. I took the time to go over the skills I had taken. Brute strength, enhance your musculature and grow your strength by 3 for the next 30 seconds. Cost 100 stamina. Cooldown 1 minute. Impact arrow, give your arrow 3 times the impact. Cost 25 mana. Cooldown 20 SEC. Kill shot, allow your arrow to strike the weakest point of your target. Cost 40 mana. Cooldown 1 minute. I read through the few others, but nothing was even of note. Brute strength was better than my own giant strength buff, but not even close to being as effective as godly might. I did try using them in tandem, and godly might just cancelled the other out. It proved what Fiona had told me earlier. As for the arrow skills, they were useless for me. I had no intention of even trying to pick up a bow. I still had 4 open slots, but I saw no point in leaving them occupied with wasted skills. I would sacrifice 1 using Reclaim and 2 for Void Lottery. I looked to see what I got. Darken a 20-foot area, making it 25% darker than before, lasts 10 minutes, cost 40 mana. Cooldown 30 minutes. Unfortunately, it wasn't a winner. Oh well, perhaps next time. The 2 of us found Ska and Fiona quickly. How was it? I asked. 2 smaller groups of 4 each. Lower levels, around 10. Ska replied in derision. Well, let's go see what awaits us at the village. The orc village was surrounded by a palisade. I had to give the creatures credit, they weren't slackers. Most other villages I had seen, human and non-human, didn't even have that much defense. The gate was closed and orc archers lined the walls. 1 massive brute of an orc stood outside the gate, next to an orc covered in a robe of some sort and sporting a headdress with antlers that were almost as tall as it was. The larger orc was carrying a massive axe, and even from the wood line, 100 feet away, I could feel the power radiating from the weapon. A part of me thought it was rather wasteful to enchant a weapon to leak power, simply to inspire fear in your enemies. But then again, had we not all been high level and with high endurance, perhaps it would have worked. Wait here, I want to see what they say. I'll come with you, Fiona said, turning invisible as I nodded. Sure, I would be in the range of the archers, but archer skills hadn't impressed me overly much so far. Fiona and I stepped out of the tree line and slowly approached the pair. Stop, that will be far enough, interlopers. Why have you come into our land and killed our kin? The robed one asked, stopping me a good 40 feet away. You refused to talk, so I was tasked with dealing with the problem. Oh, so you are here to kill us all? No, just the chief. I assume that is one of you? Or is he cowering in fear behind the walls? The large one stepped forward, growling and letting his axe fall to the ground, the blunt end causing the ground to crack from the weight. Filthy human, you will regret those words when I, Chief Gar, tear you apart. I raised an eyebrow as the large orc started running toward me. No, this wasn't the chief, just some dumb brute. Fiona, deal with the idiot, while I talk with the actual chief. I turned away from the larger orc and settled my gaze on the cloaked one. If he was surprised that I had deduced his little trick, it didn't show. The large one only grew angrier as his large stomps started to shake the ground. I heard an angry war cry as he lifted his axe, ready to tear my body apart. That all ended with a grunt and the sound of air escaping. Fiona had turned physical and shoved her sword right through the orc's lung and up into the heart. The warrior collapsed like a marionette with its strings cut. The massive axe falling to the ground with a boom as he toppled over, grabbing at his wound with his free hand. During this whole exchange, I never took my eyes off the cloaked orc. As he looked on in surprise, I used Identify. Chief Markar Dark Shaman level 18. Fools, he hissed, as he started casting a spell. Arrows started to rain down as I popped Area of Denial. You 3 deal with the archers, I'll deal with the chief. I attempted to close the distance as a billowing cloud of grey burst forth from the caster, obscuring the area for a moment before it cleared up. I was momentarily confused as I saw no effect from the spell. Deciding not to wait, I rushed the caster before he could get off another spell. I conjured an orb of darkness and threw it at the chief as he prepared a sickly-colored bolt of energy to throw at me. The orb passed through his body and struck the gate behind him, winking out. What the hell? I didn't have time to think about it as a dozen bruise-colored orbs crashed into my shield. Thankfully the orc chief didn't have tier 2 intelligence or the orbs would have cracked my shield. I noticed the orbs didn't come from his location. I realized his first spell must have been some sort of illusion. I activated my eye tattoo and immediately the false image was gone. I swung my head around until I spotted the caster, readying another spell. This time the horns above his head were glowing a deep scarlet and a dark vortex was forming among the center. I threw a quick arcane bolt at the caster, hoping to disrupt the spell, but it splashed against a shimmering shield. I grunted in annoyance, it was like sparring with Martin. It was a good thing I had a skill for this. I slammed my staff into the ground, activating disruption. The wave of rock raced toward the shield and the immovable caster. It shook the shield and the ground below, causing the caster's spell to fizzle out but failing to break the shield. The orc now stood in a crooked circle of earth as all around it the ground was shattered and broken. I didn't have any abilities to defeat shields other than brute force, but I did have a weapon. It was a race as the caster prepared his spell again, while my hand split and charged. I aimed it at the caster only a split second before he finished his spell. The burst of pure mana from my mana cannon slammed into his shield, causing the whole thing to ripple violently for a moment before it shattered like glass. The only problem was, the shield had absorbed all of the energy of my attack. Dark bolts of lightning reached me only a moment later, flickering across my shield and turning the area around me black as they corrupted the very essence of reality. My shield held against the magical onslaught but I was forced to leap back as the hole in reality spawned a dark horror, nearly as bad as some of Martin's. The void horror clawed its way out of the ground as the caster laughed insanely. "Nah, Martin, you handle this creature," I yelled, activating charge and blink step to appear next to the caster, surprising him. My staff slammed across his head with a sickening crunch, causing his antlered headdress to go flying. I heard Martin in the background, chanting a spell before he yelled, "Begone, foul creature." The wounded chief tried to stand but I had had enough. I jammed my staff into his chest and activated shockwave. The ripple of force smashed his body into the ground, flattening him slightly. Somehow he was still alive. I ended his life with flurry of blows, or I tried to. A dark pit appeared in his chest as I stabbed down, closing off and taking the end of my staff with it. I threw the weapon down and used my wings to escape the area. The release of magical energy was violent and I wasn't entirely successful at getting away as the roil of released magic washed over me. I felt Ska grab me as we ran. I felt the heat as a second blast rolled across us. Ska was thrown to the ground and I remember hitting my head on a tree. Everything was in a daze for a few seconds before my faculties returned. I cast heals on everyone as soon as I could concentrate enough to form the sounds of the spell. "Everyone okay? You really gotta stop setting off magical items like that," Martin groaned. I had to agree with him. I had thought that magical items could only be triggered to explode if they were overpowered. I guess I should have realized that wasn't the case since I had used magical items as improvised explosives in the past. I made a note to add a cut-off circuit in all my future projects. I also realized that I had already built this into the fortress, thanks to the control station. I couldn't imagine the damage that would cause if it blew up. When I finally got enough energy to sit up, I saw a crater where the chief had been. Over a quarter of the palisade had been vaporized by the blast and fire was already spreading to the remaining wall. I could hear screams inside but I also saw warriors running around trying to put the fire out. Our work here was complete, the orcs wouldn't be a problem again for some time. It was time to leave. We were able to make it back to the fortress without too much issue. One group of orcs had tried to stop us but they were dealt with swiftly. Once safely inside we lifted off and I had time to finally take a look at the gains from the fight. Paul Fuller Mantra Enchanter / Maw of the Void level 2015. Summon Chaos Elemental. This spell summons a Chaos Elemental equal to the caster's level. Requires the caster to have a totem linked to the elemental plane of chaos. Lasts for 1 hour. Cost 150 mana. Cooldown 3 hours. My second class had finally hit level 15, allowing me to switch my experience gain back to my main class. Which I did immediately. My second class was good, but I already had more skills than I knew what to do with. Then came the skill I pulled off the chief. At first, I was excited to use it, I knew how useful Martin's summons were. But, I couldn't use the ability. It seemed it required an additional skill that the chief's class possessed to make totems. I realized this must have been what that headdress was. Too bad it had been obliterated in the devastation of the caster's final attack that broke my staff. Speaking of staves, I now had no staff again. Well, that wasn't entirely true. I had the ones that I used after the dwarves had stolen all our belongings. I still needed to go through that pile of riches to see what it contained. It was still just piled in one of the storage rooms. After I finished the next mission, I told myself. For now, I went and retrieved one of the spare staves. Frotsar, do you think you could get me some replacement staves? Sure, anything particular in mind? I told him about the stats of my previous staff. Might be difficult to find a pre-made one, but I know a few crafters that could make it. Do you need them right away? No. Once we drop you off, just let me know a price and you can send it to me down in Texas. Sounds acceptable. It's a pity there aren't any established roads. I would have liked to take my business back on the road again. Give it a few years, I'm sure new trade routes will be established. That is true. Hopefully, the more aggressive wildlife will have been subdued around settled zones by then. I grunted in acknowledgement, but secretly I hoped it stayed like it was. I enjoyed the challenge.